We'll call this meeting to order, and we will begin with roll call. And Chair Tuss is here.
Regent Lozar? Here. Regent Holman? Thank you. Regent Johnson? Here. Thank you. Regent Nyson? Here. Thank you. Regent Albrecht? Here. Thank you. Commissioner Christian? Here. Thank you. The governor's office is going to be represented by Ms. Siri Smiley today, who should be joining us. And Superintendent Trudeau is represented by Mr. Steve.
We have a quorum, and we will begin. Thank you, Amy. Good morning. Good morning to everyone, and welcome to the March business meeting of the Montana Board of Regents. It is indeed a pleasure to be here at Western, a campus with a lot of educational success stories, including its groundbreaking, nationally recognized effort with block scheduling, known here in Dillon as Experience One. On behalf of this board, I want to thank Chancellor Beth Weatherby and her great staff, team of faculty and staff for hosting this meeting. We have a wide variety of items on a very full agenda for this meeting. Despite the broad diversity of issues we address at every one of our meetings, there is truly one constant universal factor that is a common denominator for everything on our agenda, and that is the hard work and dedication of students, faculty, staff, professional, and administrative leaders throughout our system that continually work to move Montana forward. A brief overview of our agenda includes the following. We will receive an update on the allocation of performance funding for the next fiscal year. This is important because our executive and legislative partners in Montana's appropriations process expect that state funds should incentivize student success and college completion and trust that we are focused on those measures. We will also receive a report on the Legislative Audit Division's study of our system workforce data reporting. The audit finds that our system spends less on administration than relative peer groups, but that we need to improve our data capabilities for both internal analytical use and external information reporting. We will hear how College Application Week went this year. This is an exciting program where 24% of high school students surveyed said they will be the first member of their family to attend college. What an incredible statement about the power of education to transform individual lives. We also regularly have a board education component at these meetings, and this time it's WWAMI's turn to give us an important overview. Dr. Jay Erickson will provide a report on the Washington, Wyoming, Alaska, Montana, Idaho Graduate Medical Education Exchange Program and the program's specific impact on our state. Our Region Committee's agendas are packed with progress and evidence of the hard work our campuses are performing to serve students and citizens across Montana. The Budget Committee at this meeting will tackle more items than I will mention now, but I will note that some of the committee's agenda at this meeting will set the table for state and legislative related subjects we will address at the May meeting in Havre. The May meeting is when the board will adopt and forward recommendations to the Governor's Office for state funding and long-range building priorities in preparation for the 2017 legislature. The committees for two-year education and academic research and student affairs will address a number of items that all have one thing in common I mentioned earlier and is of great importance to this board, and that is student success. We will hear updates and take actions related to student wellness, student learning, and improvements in our system planning process for academic proposals. Finally, the Staff and Compensation Committee will address 7 more labor agreements that have been ratified by unions and now come to us for a vote of approval. All told, we now have 21 of the 25 labor agreements in the system settled. Where we don't yet have settlements, productive bargaining is ongoing. With this level of overview of the work ahead of us for the next 2 days, I believe we are ready to proceed. This concludes my opening remarks. Once again, it is a pleasure to be on the Western campus this spring semester, and I'm now going to turn the microphone over to Chancellor Weatherby for her greeting. Chancellor Weatherby.
Thank you. Welcome. And Katie is going to put up our slides. And we're just thrilled to have everyone here. We're honored to have you. Welcome. I did that for dramatic effect. We're thrilled to have you here on the campus. We're honored by your presence. We hope you have a wonderful time, both on our campus and in Dillon over the next couple of days. I'm glad that you are focusing on student success, Chair Tuss, because we really are the student success story here at Western. This is the last day of Block 6. So you'll recognize that there's a very different rhythm on this campus than on most. I think most of you know that we have a very different academic calendar. There are 8 blocks. Our students take one course at a time for 18 days, then they have a long weekend. This time it's spring break, so tomorrow's going to be very quiet. And our students really appreciate the schedule, as you'll see. So I'd like to just quickly thank our staff. This was kind of a project, and it's a wonderful staff. Thank you, everyone, for the hard work you did to put this together. We're going to highlight this morning some recent positive developments in relation to both our traditional mission as Montana's normal school and our more recently developed and very non-traditional mission. Most of you know that we were founded in 1893 as Montana's normal college, so teacher preparation is our foundation and our grounding, and we're very proud of what we do in preparing teachers. There's hardly a school that you can go to in Montana where you will not find our alums. Recent developments, we were the first education program in Montana to go through the new process with CAPE accreditation. And it went very, very well. It was one of the first in the nation, actually, so it was, it was a little nerve-wracking. But we were commended for providing an extraordinary level of student support. In fact, the reviewer who shared that news with us kind of teared up as she said it, which was great. If you can make the reviewers cry, it's always good. And then we were commended for our early childhood outreach program. It reaches into all corners of the state, and our partnerships with the schools are very, very strong. This fall, we implemented our new pre-kindergarten to 3 program. Our faculty and staff worked really hard to get that together. We have approximately 80 students enrolled in that program. It was very, very successful, and they worked hard to get that going because there was such good scholarship money available for the students, and they're really taking advantage of that. One of our alums from 1993, Aaron Griffin, the principal up at Frenchtown Elementary, won the 2015 National Distinguished Principal Award from the National Association of Elementary School Principals. And I just learned last week that Ron Goodman up in Libby has won one of those awards for 2016. So, pretty good. And Katie, why don't you go to the next slide so they can look at something different while I talk about the next couple of things. That's the original main hall, by the way, and some of our first students. Online colleges in the fall recognized Montana Western as having one of the best online bachelors in early childhood education in the nation. We've been doing early childhood since the 80s, and we're really, really proud of it. So to turn to success related to Experience 1, experiential learning, one class at a time. This year marks our 10th anniversary, and we're really glad that you're here to celebrate with us. Last spring, we awarded the largest number of degrees ever in 122 years. Last fall, we enrolled the largest class of new students ever. One of only 2 campuses in this state increased their new entering freshmen over the last 5 years, and the two are Montana Western and Gallatin College. So we're really proud of that. And last fall, we were ranked with Montana Tech, good morning, Don, among the top 5 regional public colleges in the West. Our faculty, I think, as many of you know, have won many statewide and national awards to recognize their work to make this happen, and some of them are in the room today. It would take me a long time to go through that, so I think you know we've won a lot of CASE awards, we've won Montana awards, and that we can really attribute the recognition to the work that happened to create Experience One. I want to thank Deputy Commissioner Tyler Trevor for updating our student success metrics, and we're going to show those now just for, this has really continued. Oh, I'm sorry. This goes back to the traditional, quickly. I didn't tell Katie to move the slides. Go to the next one, please. That's the education, Experience One. Okay, next is the update. Thanks, Katie. So let's go to the first slide. And let's go to the second slide. This is what we're going to go through very quickly. As you can see, these are really pretty dramatic. Our enrollment has grown and stabilized. It's gone up by over 36% pre-X1. And it was that first year, as we got around 997, that actually a small group of faculty realized that we had to do something. The enrollment was declining so much. And you can see that we have really, X1 has really stabilized this institution. Next. Retention rates have gone up by 10 points. We're up at 75%. And pre-X1, we were 65%. Next slide. Graduation rates have gone up from 13 to 25% higher than the pre-X1, and the next projected 6-year count is 55%. Degrees awarded. This has gone up by 135%, or over 219 students. And the next slide. This is really a striking fact related to X1, and that is that in remedial education, the system average on 4-year campuses is 60%. When we're talking about students who have taken a remedial writing class and then go on to succeed in college writing, our percentage is 87%, and it's been as high as 94%. And this is a great example of one of the successes that I think needs to be really studied and shared, because remedial work makes such a difference to student success over the long term. And what our faculty have done here is just incredible. And the next slide. This is the slide that I think of as the money-saving slide. The students have, our students freshmen complete 91% of their courses. This goes a little up and down. The highest was 96%. That's really extraordinary. And they complete an average of 14.5 credits per semester. That means that they're not wasting as much money, and they're not spending as much money, and they're able to complete more quickly. So this is really something to pay attention to. And the next slide. I'll just focus on the bottom line. Education majors, Montana residents, if the 13-14 statistics are that 91% of our education majors found employment in Montana within 1 year of graduation. So, another great success. It's clear that this happened because of the hard work of our faculty and our staff. It took incredible persistence and vision and hard work to make this happen. And to celebrate the 10th anniversary of Experience One, we created a video last fall to give you this story in a really short form. A few of you have already seen it, but I'd like to share it with the large group. And you'll see that even since fall, a couple of the details are out of date. So Katie, if you could show the video.
There wasn't just one idea. Montana Western was in trouble because we did not have a niche. We were losing enrollment.
I wanted to go back to Aboriginal learning, where faculty and students work collaboratively and experientially to solve problems in society. And I wanted to remove the lectern as the focus of education.
I was pretty intrigued by the idea. I know it was brought forward to me by some of the faculty who are very convincing faculty. I know Rob Thomas was the lead faculty member, but he also had convinced many others that this would be a good idea for Western.
It was an unusual concept, I think, for me and a lot of people here in town, because I guess when we all went to college, we did the regular kind of curriculum, 4 or 5 classes and so forth. We didn't really think that one class at a time was going to work.
I was concerned. I thought it was a desperate move, is the word that comes to mind. I just thought, have we fallen that far? How close are we to not having the college if that's what we have to do?
When I first heard about Experience One, it was the buzz on campus. As a local girl, I also was hearing a lot from the town, who was very concerned about what might happen to Western if we made this brave new step.
The implementation process was kind of an uphill battle. The core group of faculty members figured out how they wanted to teach in this new way, and then they had to talk the entire faculty into just trying this.
My main probably contribution to X1 was the grant.
Sheila wouldn't take no for an answer, and she came back again and again and again and again, and ultimately found grant money to create an alternative on campus so we could compare an alternative approach to our standard approach.
We had known about Colorado College and their block scheduling.
I went with Rob Thomas and Sheila Roberts on a trip to Colorado College and was convinced there that this might be something that we'd want to look at and see if it would work at Montana Western.
It didn't take but one trip down there to realize the schedule works, but inside the schedule we've got to do something differently that supports this field experience.
We ended up having to make a joint task force, and Provost Carl Ulrich and I worked together and had daily meetings with a task force of people to start figuring out each and every little tiny detail. I look back, I don't know how we did it.
The first year we did a lot of planning, trying to figure out who was going to teach what and how the students were going to interact with that. The second year we had a group of 75 freshmen that we began with and tried to figure out what courses they should be taking and how best to move them through that process. It was very an arduous task because it was completely different.
Experience One is, without a doubt, one of the most exciting things happening in higher education in the United States today. We're the only public 4-year institution offering experiential learning on the block schedule, 1 class at a time.
Our enrollment has grown dramatically over the time period since we have adopted Experience One.
If we look at the graduate school placements, we're knocking it out of the park.
We've stabilized the institution, which is very important to our community at large. The graduation rates have more than doubled. Retention rates are higher than any other institution in the state.
The single best model that we have right now in Montana, in our university system, for retaining and graduating our students exists around Experience One.
With Experience One at Montana Western, students are coming here, they're doing something unique, they're doing something different, and more importantly, they're doing something that works. It's making them prepared for that next level and also making them successful in the long run.
I think the implementation of Experience One has meant a complete paradigm shift in the community, in the university, and especially our students.
Experience One block schedule, it's unbeatable. It's the best way to learn the material in your courses. It just makes everything so much simpler.
I can't even begin to tell you how much more positive the feeling is at Western than it was many years ago.
The diversity that is brought to both the community and to the college is just amazing. Those students are going out of Western, leaving University of Montana Western, going on to the next progression in their life, and they're well prepared for it, whatever it is.
I realized that for this to have happened, there had to be leaders in every area of this campus. We can go in so many directions from here, but I think what we really need to do now is to share the story. There's a huge opportunity to spread the word. This has worked.
Experience One has lent itself to international travel. It has lent itself to students learning through a hands-on approach. And anytime we can wrap all of those pieces together around predictability, around small class sizes, around hands-on learning, we're going to have a model for success, and that's exactly what they have at the University of Montana Western with Experience One.
So you can see a couple of things changed. Our interim admission director, Matt Allen, is no longer interim, yay. And then there was that change with Angela, one of our alums. We really are focusing now on sharing the story, and we're getting phone calls and emails every week from people who want to explore this with us. What we're doing is sharing the story, looking for support to really enhance this model on our campus and to help others explore it. It's a huge opportunity for Montana and beyond. And so thank you for being here to celebrate. Would all of our faculty and staff who were able to make it today, please stand and be recognized for the incredible work you've done. Some of you are already standing because we have. And to celebrate, we've made a cake out of Bulldog bars. They're granola bars that are made with Montana ingredients. And thank you. And those will be outside for you to enjoy during the break. We'll also celebrate tonight. Thank you so much. You can come this way. The fire code doesn't allow real candles, so. So everybody join us tonight at 5, or whenever the meeting is finished, but probably around 5, over in the lower lobby of Main Hall. We're in the third phase of the renovation of that incredible building, and you'll be able to peek in to the part that's being renovated, which is the model classroom that's very generously funded by the Washington Foundation. And you'll see the before site of the Legacy Plaza, which is going to be a beautiful center of the campus. And that was funded by our friends and neighbors in the region and Pioneer Federal. So there will also be art exhibits and a chance to interact with some of our students and faculty. So once again, please make yourselves at home here. If you need anything, ask us, and enjoy the next couple of days. Thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you, Chancellor. Thank you, Chancellor, for that great welcome and introduction. We're glad to be here. Let us now move on to the next agenda item, which is the approval of minutes from our January 19th conference call. We've all had the opportunity to review those. Is there a motion to approve? So moved. You've heard the motion. Any discussion? Any conversation? Any questions from the Regents, the campuses, or the public? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion carries. Thank you. Commissioner, I guess we should go into campus introductions. Are there any introductions that the various campuses have for us at this point? President Engstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I'm very proud to introduce a special group of attendees from the University of Montana at this meeting. Last fall, we launched at the university something called the Women's Leadership Initiative, and we identified a cohort of 12 women from among the faculty, staff, and leadership of the institution to engage upon a year-long professional development program. And part of that professional development is to attend a Regents meeting, and being here in Western, fairly close to Missoula, this is the meeting that they chose to attend. So I would just like that group to stand and be recognized if they would, please.
Welcome, and thank you for being with us today. Any additional introductions? Commissioner.
Mr. Chair, we would like to make an introduction on behalf of the Commissioner's Office. We're very pleased to announce, subject to board approval, of course, that we have filled the administrative and finance position. Probably no one more pleased to announce that than Frida, myself, and Tyler Trevor, who pretending to be Mick for the last several months. But we went through a fairly extensive national search to come home to Montana and find one of our own in Chuck Jensen, who's served as in a similar role at Flathead Valley Community College. Chuck was the successful candidate out of that incredible pool of individuals and brings a wealth of knowledge to the position. Chuck served his entire career in higher education in one way or another through work at Legislative Fiscal, so he's got experience there. He's worked in Bozeman at a four-year campus, Northern at a four-year campus, and of course now at Flathead Valley Community College. So we welcome him to the staff. We apologize to Jane Karras for stealing her once board chair and now her chief financial officer, but it will serve the system very well, and welcome Chuck on board.
Welcome, Chuck, and congratulations. Are there any additional introductions at this point? Any introductions? Seeing none. Do we have one back here? Oh, please.
Yes, Dawson Community College has a new Vice President of Academics, Dr. Scott Mickelson. We're pleased to welcome him to
Welcome. Thank you for being here. Seeing no further introductions, Commissioner, let's move to your report. I believe that's next on the agenda. And if I'm not mistaken, the first item would be performance funding.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd make just a couple comments first. Would like to say we had a wonderful breakfast this morning with our faculty representatives. We talked a lot about community service. I think it was enlightening, eye-opening in many ways. The outreach that our university system has to the communities that we serve and the entire state is impressive in many, many ways. I would also like to remind everyone, certainly they don't need reminding, our regents, but they too serve the state of Montana day in and day out with their post as a regent within this system. A few people along the way have thought that this job pays well. I can assure you it doesn't pay anything. And so we thank them for the tremendous hours and dedication that they put in every day to serve the Montana University system as well. I have a few things that I would like to cover, starting with a presentation that will be made at the 10th of this month up in Great Falls. The Montana ambassadors have chosen Susan Wolf as their Educator of the Year, and I think that is incredibly appropriate and worth noting here. I don't know where, oh, Susan's right there. Susan, congratulations. She certainly is serving as a model educator in the Great Falls community, but also within the greater MUS community. Susan will speak to us as part of the ARSA committee about a program prioritization effort that they have went through in Great Falls. And I want to say, I think, you know, this goes back to Regents' requests 5 or 6 years ago that said, how do we allocate resources and how do we make sure they meet the needs of the community, and how will our institutions rise to that occasion, seeing that resources are directed where they need to be to meet the needs of Montanans. And I really do believe the work that's been done there over the last year will serve as a model for all of our institutions. So while recognized as Educator of the Year, I think also doing a great job within the MUS to show tremendous leadership on program prioritization. So Susan, again, thank you for all your efforts. We, I think, can go into the performance funding model. Tyler Trevor's going to lead us through that. Certainly now into sort of full-fledged implementation of this. We're learning more about it every day, and both from a positive and a negative. As our enrollment shifts a bit, though, as we discussed with the Legislative Interim Committee a few weeks ago, performance funding is lending itself to helping us fund performance, not purely FTE. And I think that will be an important conversation for us moving forward. We haven't had FTE as a component of our budget since 2006. And it'll be an important message that we carry into the 2017 session, that not only are they funding us based on outcomes, but it's making a difference within the MUS. And we see that already. And Tyler can lead us through this conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. Mr. Chair, members of the board, good morning. I almost feel apologetic that we jump into topics such as performance funding after only being in the meeting for maybe a half hour, but I welcome you and ask you to join me in shifting into performance funding mode. And in order to fully get there, before we talk about the allocations, I think it's helpful to very quickly talk about attributes of the model, and just as a reminder of how we do these calculations. I recently gave this presentation to the Education and Local Government Interim Committee, and so this first part is a very brief method of giving a synopsis of where we've been and what the model looks like. As the Commissioner just mentioned, we have not used FTE for our state appropriation formula since 2006. We do use FTE in our allocation of those state appropriations to the campuses, and we've done so since 1972, or thereabouts, I guess, the origin of the university system, through 2014. That was the sole method for allocating the state appropriations to the campus. Once we instituted performance funding in FY 2015, we injected 5% of our methodology, or 5% of those state appropriations were allocated through some sort of performance measurement. At that time, that was the original, the first model, just focused on completions and retention. Immediately following that, we went into work on a more detailed model that was more reflective of our institution's varying missions. And we adopted different metrics. We stayed with retention and completion for all campuses, but we included more detailed metrics, and I'll show you those by campus. We also increased the amount in this last legislative session from $7.5 million we allocated in the first go-around in FY15 to $15 million in each year of this biennium, so quite considerable increases. That now represents 8% of our total state appropriations. So The goals, I won't spend any time on this. We could talk about it at length, but to increase degree production is what we've always stated as our #1 goal. That's what the best practices of performance funding around the nation are based upon, is to increase the number of graduates, not graduation rates, but the number of graduates that we produce that would affect the overall percent of the population that has a higher education. And another way of saying that, I guess, is we need to focus on output as well as input. And yet another way, pay for what we value. So let's talk about the model. There's basic 9 slides here. I'll quickly move through. How do we determine the amount that each campus gets? Well, that's based upon the same method that we use to determine the overall distribution of our state appropriation based upon FTE, and that is the 3-year average of your resident FTE. So if you take a look at this, I'm going to use this pointer here. This column right here, it totals down to 27,000 FTE. Each campus has a portion of that, and that's represented in this middle column here. For instance, MSU has 30.6% of the resident FTE as it was averaged through FY13 through FY15. That basically calculates over here to $4.6 million, which is the exact amount that they have of resident FTE, 30.6 of the 15 million. And so that's very simple. Each campus has that as their amount that they can obtain if they show progress. Each campus has a unique set of metrics, as I mentioned before. We have undergraduate degree completions and retention for all campuses. At our flagships, we also include graduate degree and certificate completions and research expenditures. At our 4-year campuses, our regionals, we just have the degrees and the retention rates. That might be something we explore in terms of expanding those metrics down the road. Our 2-year colleges have, again, retention and completions, but also dual enrollment, and 2 other metrics, which we call in a menu. We had anticipated having multiple selections down here, but as the data worked out, all campuses basically had to go with success in remedial education and credit accumulation. Please stop me at any time here if you have a question. I'm going to move fairly quickly on these other attributes. For each primary metric, we also measure underrepresented at-risk groups. Those groups that are split out for just about every metric, are American Indians, Pell recipients, veterans, and non-traditional students. We award bonus points if you increase in this area. I'll show you more on how that works. Metrics are measured annually against a campus's 3-year average. And I have this part in red and capitalized. Campuses compete against themselves. That is one of the most, the biggest change that we made from the first model. We actually had campuses competing against themselves in their metrics, but we re-awarded any funds that were left over were re-awarded to campuses that made progress. In essence, creating a competition between the campuses. We've done away with that, and as we move through these other attributes, I'll explain what we do with those residual funds. But for instance here, and I'm going to walk you through campuses as we move through this, if you took a look at the degree completions here, we have 200 in the average in this example. This example campus got 210 in the current year, so they had a 5% increase. And we do that for the primary metrics, and for each one of those metrics, we also measure the underrepresented at-risk groups. The metric values are weighted. At the flagships, it's 30% weight on the 2 primary metrics and 20 on the other 2. And then we have the 4-year, and you can see the distribution there. This is where you start to think, my God, this thing is a little bit more complicated than I thought. And once you thought that, you didn't see this slide. Metrics are then indexed to a 1,000-point scale. So rather than measure each one independently, which we did in the first model, we found the errors of our ways, and we created a composite score. So this is a true measure of institutional performance based upon a composite. That composite is an index score that adds up to 1,000. And let me quickly show you on this first line what that would look like. Remember the 200 completions in the 3-year average. This campus got 210. It's a 5% increase. A 5% increase on 1,000 gets you to 1,050. If you weight 1,050 by 30%, you come up with 315. If you do that for every metric, same methodology, you total down here at 1,030. So math in public is tough enough. This detailed spreadsheet trying to explain it, very, very complicated and tough. I would take any questions that you might have.
So is this screen 7, is the index the thing that keeps the campuses from competing against each other and changes it so that they compete against themselves?
Mr. Chair, Regent Sheehy, not really. This 1,000-point index score prevents metrics from being measured individually. In the first model, we measured retention, and if you increased here, you got money, and then we measured completions, and if you decreased there, you got money subtracted. So this is, I didn't hit that button. This is a more holistic way of looking at campus performance, rather than focusing on one individual metric and then drilling down to those individual students that may or may not have been retained or completed. Okay, we have a transition. Oh, sorry.
I have to share my microphone. Can you give us a little bit more background on what you believe is the relationship between research expenditures and degree completion?
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnstone, you always ask such tough questions. What I think is the connection between those, and we have a host of experts in the room that can answer this in more detail. But research expenditures, expenditures in research is a measure of the amount of research that's occurring on campuses. That research funnels down to undergraduates. I think that's at a core of very many of these projects, is to get undergraduates involved and more undergraduate engagement, particularly in tangible things like we heard with experiential learning in the labs, things that translate to jobs, keep people coming back. It increases your retention rates, and in the long run produces more degree recipients because you get people to stick around, and they're seeing degrees that apply to jobs, and they're seeing it in their education.
Good. That's enough expertise for me. Thank you.
So the transitional loss zone, we're going to talk about that, and we're going to see that in the data. In fact, is the area, oops, sorry.
I wanted to back up to Bill's question. Weren't these 4 things on the metrics? We identified those as things we wanted to encourage. And so we wanted to encourage research expenditures. We assumed it would have some impact, but am I right that these were the things we wanted to encourage?
Mr. Chair, Regent Sheehy, yes, you're exactly right. And the research expenditures research is a big component of the institutional mission of the flagship campuses. So we wanted the metrics to better reflect the whole mission rather than just a portion of it. The transitional loss zone is that buffer zone that when we incrementally pull money away from a campus, rather than if you miss it by 1 tick, you lose $4 million. It slowly pulls the money away. There's a formula that does that. I'd be happy to talk with anybody offline about that. We also have the use of the residual funds. Regent Sheehy, this is where we eliminated the campus competition amount. In the first model, when a campus didn't obtain all of its funds, we took those funds and we reapplied them to the campuses that did make progress, in essence, creating a competition between the campuses. Now we take those residual funds and we hold them out, and we do a couple things with them. We tell a campus, you can apply for a portion of these funds if you can give us a kind of an explanation and a plan of what you're going to do to use those funds to increase these metrics, the retention and completion areas. We also very generously, boy, it's hard to say when you don't have a drink of water, allow campuses to earn that money back in the second year. And if you make progress you lose money in the first year of the biennium and you make progress in the second year of the money, you earn back your first year money. I'm going to give you an example of that here in a minute too. But what I won't give you an example of is the final one. And is if we have any money left at the end of the biennium, we will flow those funds into a need-based scholarship account. Okay, so all that said to get up to this. And here's the thank you. That was for effect. All right, so now let's look at the spreadsheet again here. We have the resident FTE adding up to 27,000. This was the example that I showed you earlier, and the amounts, and each campus qualifies for these amounts. Here are the index scores which campuses received. I'm going to walk you through each campus, believe it or not, real quickly, to show you how campuses earn these points, because I don't want anybody leaving here thinking that this was just a gimme. Granted, almost every campus received 100% of their funds. I don't believe that's always going to be the case, and I want to show you evidence of why campuses improved and what to look for in the future. And then you see the amount that they received over here, and we have one campus that received less than 100%. And then also a footnote down here on MSU billings that says they earned back their money from year one when they lost $760,000. They made progress this year. They earned that money back. Okay. There's links there to the old models too, so if you really get interested in this, you can go there, and I could be up here for quite some time. So let's look at MSU, and let's look at just the bars in blue. The ones that aren't in blue are the underrepresented groups. Not that they're not important, but they're giving you bonus points. The ones in blue are giving you your core score that you're trying to achieve, which is 1,010 points. Why 1,010? I didn't mention that earlier. 1,000 would mean that you just stayed the same. 1,010 means you made progress, a 1% increase. You have to make progress. So undergraduate degrees, we have at MSU, you can see the large increase. Focus on this column. Every time we come to a campus, look at this percent increase column. And we'll just go down MSU here, 13% increase in completions, 2.1% increase in retention, 15% increase in graduate degrees, -4 in research expenditures. Add in their bonus points, they easily made it past the 1,010 mark with 1,201. Let's try U of M. 1% increase in completions, -3 in retention, 4 in graduate degrees, 8% increase in research expenditures, and 13 on the bonus points adds up to 1,033. All right, so everybody understands where we're going here. Let me know when you want me to stop. Billings, an important one, an 11% increase in completions. They had some bonus points there in completions as well. -7 in retention, -10 in underrepresented groups in retention. When it all came out in the wash, 1,018 made it by, earned the money back. Northern, 5% increase in completions, -3 in retention, nothing in the bonus points. 1,013 just made it. Montana Tech, -4 in completions, 1 in retention, a little bit in bonus, didn't make it. This is where the transitional zone came in. We didn't just take the total amount that Tech qualified for, and I don't know that exact number, but we incrementally peeled it off, and as a result, Tech received about $130,000 less than their maximum amount. Western, giant increase in completions, increase in retention, no problem. Okay, City College, the two-year colleges have a little bit different dynamic here, and I wanted to walk through this because of one of the things that's happening here, and City College is a good indication of it. -5 in completions, -1 in retention. If those were just the only two metrics, obviously wouldn't make it. 37% increase in dual enrollment. That's exactly what we've asked them to do. It was one of the reasons we put it in here as a metric, and it certainly is one of the cause for this campus making it by the 1,010 mark. The credit accumulation, which is what % of your full-time students can earn 24 credits in the first year, or what % of part-time students can earn, I believe, 12 credits in the first year. That is an indication of student progress. So let's take a look at Gallatin. Gallatin is like, it's in that new college era where they're just knocking it out of the park on every one of these. Great Falls College, 2% increase in completions, -5 in retention, 64 in dual enrollment, no problem. Helena College, -3 in completions, -5 in retention, 61 in dual enrollment, 21 in remedial success, 8% in the credit accumulation, no problem. And remember, these are weighted too, so the bottom ones are weighted less, but there's such large increases that they're keeping them above the line. Highlands, 8% in completions, 18% in retention. That's pretty remarkable there. The retention rates, by percentage points, they went up 11 percentage points, but when you take the % increase, which you have to do for this formula, it's 18% increase. And then, the rest of it, this remedial success here too is giant. They're way over. And Missoula College, 9, 4, 17 in dual enrollment, no problem. Mr. Chair, members of the board, that is it for the presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chair Tess. Thanks for making that a little bit more entertaining than it appears to be. So I'm excited to take a look at this after it's been put in practice for a couple of years now. And I recall when we were first tossing these ideas around, and truly with much consternation across the campuses. What I think it's important for folks to realize is that there was much engagement on the campuses, much input from faculty to ensure that these metrics were going to be applicable, et cetera. So I understand, and meaningful, most importantly. I understand now that we've obviously tweaked it. We know that it's not in our best interest to look at competition. In fact, to pull that away in any in certain factors like this is absolutely critical. So my question is, when we look forward, do you see that the campuses will come together to take a look at any other additional adjustments to this to these metrics in the future?
Mr. Chair, Regent Albrecht, yes, I do. And in fact, one area in particular are the metrics for the four-year regional campuses. There was a lot of dynamics and discussion that went on when we developed those metrics, and the campuses, the four-year group, came to the conclusion that they wanted to stay with the 2 original metrics, and that's it. I think we need to examine whether there are others that come into play for the four-year campuses. Obviously, look at the 2-year campuses and what dual enrollment and how important a part of that aspect of that mission that is for them. I think they might vary, though, by those four-year campuses. Those four-year regionals, I would insist on a couple principles that we stay with, and that's retention and completion being at the core, but then build or at least explore what those other metrics might look like. And I'm fully ready and willing to embrace that effort with the campuses and bring back what we find to the board. I'd like to say we'd be able to do that by the next meeting, but you have to move quickly when you do this. If you're going to adopt new metrics, it's very awkward when you do that after the model's already been run and you didn't even know you were trying to improve that metric, yet you're using it to award performance. And that kind of happens at the beginning of a model anyway. Mm-hmm. So we're faced with that. But long answer, the other area too, I think we would want to take a look at what we do with the residual funds and at least how campuses earn those back. Right now it's very rudimentary. If you increase, bang, you get the total amount back from the previous year. I think we want to look at and how those funds should be spent. And that might be more just internal to the finance and administration of the overall university system.
And as a follow-up, it appears, it's great. It's much like our own children. We're trying to look at how do we incentivize them to move forward in some of these areas. I'm curious if you believe that this is watered down too much to where it doesn't have the impact that was originally intended, with folks having the opportunity to earn those things back. I'm constantly criticized by my own husband by giving that chance to earn back.
Yeah.
I'm not harsh enough. But, I'm just kind of curious about those. Are we really giving it the incentive that it needs to ensure we're making an impact in those areas?
Mr. Chair, Regent Albrecht, I've thought about that obviously a lot too along the way, and maybe came to a new place. I do know this has created interest. People pay attention to the performance funding model and the metrics. If it's done anything, it's elevated the amount that we talk about retention and completion. Absolutely. Yeah, we give campuses the opportunity to earn money back, but I would like to tell everybody that those funds are part of the base when we get them. The first year of that we received performance funding, it was actually our present law adjustment. The next legislative session, it's just part of the funds we get from the legislature, and this is how we're using, for 8% of those funds, our method of allocation. So it's not an extra layer of funding. So there needs to be some sort of governor in place when campuses don't succeed. You wouldn't want to harm an institution, and I think we repetitively said that when we adopted performance funding. We don't want to cause harm, and I believe that we have the right governors in place to prevent that from happening. I also, though, believe that we're up against some big time demographics and economic forces in our state that drive a lot of things, and enrollment is one of them, and the pool of students that we have, and the competition for those students, and shrinking enrollments. We haven't found our level yet. They have an impact on the number of completions, obviously. You can prevent that by increasing retention and increasing student success, but it's easier to say that than to actually do it. So the long answer is, I think it's tough enough. You'll see almost all campuses receiving funds right now. I don't think that's always going to be the case. I think there's going to be a more of a myriad of what happens in future years. So I think we're at a really good place with this model.
Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Commissioner Trevor. So this was all kind of helped devised or encouraged by the legislature, correct? A few sessions ago.
So, Mr. Chair, Regent Nystuen, if I could, one of the unique things that happened in that 2015 session, which I think is very important, is the concept of giving us what I think amounted to a greater present law adjustment to put some portion of that into performance funding was certainly something that we discussed with the legislature. But one of the key elements of that is that we would design how that works. So there has been really no legislative input into this process. It's been driven by Tyler's team, which I think has done a great job with tremendous input from across our campuses, including broad participation by faculty and other members. So it was very important to us, if we committed to that this wasn't a legislative fix that they designed, but an MUS implemented program based on funding that was available. And so I think it's an important distinction.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. The question ultimately is, what kind of feedback, what type of information are you getting back from the legislature saying, you know what, you guys nailed it. You did exactly what, was important at that particular time to help move this forward. Are they offering any suggestions to tweak it at all? Again, I know it's fairly new in the process, but any initial comments or feedback so far?
Mr. Chair, Regent Nystuen, I think the feedback was very positive, positive enough that in the, sorry I said 15, but 13 session was the first time. I think in the 15 session, They repeated that trend, and I think, again, we received some additional funds to put toward that. This conversation's come up a few times at interim committees. It came up a few weeks ago at audit. I think there's a general consensus that they want their Montana University system, all of our Montana University system, public education, to serve the needs of Montana, and that we work toward some of those outcomes that are important. I think what you see in this model is things that the board has discussed, and frankly, that the public has discussed, with regard to developmental ed being one of the greatest barriers, credit accumulation. You know, for all the conversations we have about finances, and those are incredibly important, still a lot of the data would suggest the reason students drop out is they're not making progress. And I think this model works toward incentivizing dual enrollment and remedial success and accumulation of credits, especially at the 2-year, but it's building toward what's important. And ultimately, it's not those individual drivers that's important, but it's student success. And I think the legislature generally sees this as an effort toward that student success piece, and they've been, at least to me in those circles, very complimentary of the fact that it was implemented, that we got the implementation actually done. Many systems are still studying this. There's charts out there, and there's a lot of gray states that are working on it, but we got it done. We've got it implemented. Yeah, we've tweaked it a bit, but there tends to be a great appreciation for the fact that it's in place. We're trying to make it move forward, and that we're really focusing on things that matter in terms of student success.
Regent Holman.
Thank you. Tyler, thanks for the levity. I was part of the session where we walked away with this, and also the early conversations around it. And I remember a lot of consternation at the time, and I know a lot of that has subsided, but I wonder, and maybe this is more of a question for the unit heads, but I wonder where the faculty is at on it now, in your opinion. And also, on a separate note, I think that through these sides, with the exception of just 2, remedial success being increased at all of our city colleges is pretty remarkable. So I just wanted to have that recognition for our city colleges who are here.
Mr. Chair, Regent Holman, thanks for that. And I usually don't know, I don't have my finger on the pulse of faculty unless it's really bad. And then I knew when it was really bad when we first started, so I haven't heard anything lately. But I would have to pass the ball to somebody else to really answer that.
Mr. Chair, members of the board, at Montana State University, we had several rounds of important conversations. The thing that helped us, I think, was that we were already moving in the direction of emphasizing the importance of student retention and graduation rates as some of the goals that we wanted for the campus, so that it was not just externally driven, but it was something that we had understood that we needed to do. During the spring semester, Provost Potvin and I have been doing our individual visits to departments. We do this every 3 years. We take the time, we go to each department, meet with the department head, with every faculty members. And I think that the best measure of how much this has worked is that in every department, the department heads provide us with data about how they're doing in terms of their initiatives for student success and retention and graduation rates. This makes a lot of sense also because it was already approved also in our strategic plan. So in that manner, we were moving in that direction already. I also would like for us to be cautious. This is like an investment. And it's important to allow it some time to mature before we rush to tweak it or to implement additional changes. I think I would like to see what happens, after 2-3 years, what kind of returns we have. I understand that our comprehensive campuses might still want to add 1 or 2 additional indicators. We have followed every rule in which we were advised not to have too few indicators, not too many that makes it almost like anything goes. I think that there's some room for the 4-year, for the master's comprehensive to come up and take a look at that. But for the most part, I think that it will be judicious on our part to allow some few years to see how this evolves and what other type of behaviors the funding formula incentivizes.
Commissioner, I have a question for you. How might this change, and has there been conversation internally about how this formula might change if there is a somewhat significant change in what the revenue mix ends up being, knowing the conversation that we've had with our policymakers at the legislature for the last 2 sessions? If this coming session is significantly different and the end result from a revenue perspective for the Montana University system is significantly different, where is this? Where is this formula?
Mr. Chair, that's a great question. My feelings are that performance funding is a mix of the funding model and not, as Tyler said earlier, there's already a portion of this that's in the base. I think it's why we need some caution on, it's not extra funding. So we need some caution on how we distribute it and the campus's ability to earn back. I frankly share Regent Albrecht's concerns that we don't want it watered down to where it has no impact, or we lose all that we're trying to gain from it. But, I also think Chancellor Nook was in this situation a year ago of losing some funds, and at the board meeting, he expressed, I think, very valid concerns that we don't create kind of the death spiral as well. We start stripping funds away, there's no ability to get those back. Less funds makes some of reaching these goals harder to attain. And so I think we need caution. Obviously, yeah, you're right. Part of this conversation that I think brought additional funding was the tuition freeze, was the notion that some would go to performance funding. But I think there's a place for it in our base. I think it still continues to drive the right conversations. It still continues to be a lever that the board has impact on ultimately sort of how money gets spent, because we're identifying drivers and we're asking campuses to work toward those drivers, and there's funding that's attributed to that beyond just how many students can you enroll. And I think it's an important piece of it. So, my feeling is that it's already moving into the base. This new money that was received in 13 is in the base. Money received in 15 will move into the base. So regardless of what happens, that money is now within the system and it will remain. And I think it's got a place in there. We just have to make sure that we are very diligent in how we apply the formula. I think President Cruzado's right, that we move slow enough that campuses can adjust so we're not sort of chasing the rabbit all the time. I think that would be a critical mistake. But if we're diligent and we're deliberate, I think it's driving student success. And that's ultimately what I think my office and this board is really wanting to make sure happens for the Montana public.
Thank you. Regent Sheehy.
Chair, I have a comment and then a question for Tyler on the screen involving MSU billings. I think it's 14. As a comment to add to this discussion, we joke about how this is a bunch of numbers and it's hard to look at, but in actuality, I think this is one of our most important pieces of what we do. And the reason I think that is because we communicate to the legislature what we want, and this little portion of what they give us, we say back to them, we're willing to be performance-driven. We'll hold ourselves to the standard of performance-driven. I think it's a really important tool for us to communicate with the legislature. I think also this is one of the important ways that we communicate to our campuses, our board policy. And our board policy is contained in those metrics. The numbers after them are a quantification of the things that we think are most important: completion and retention. We've added a few things, and that's a way for the campuses to communicate with us what they think is also important. So I think this is one of our most important tools, and I think the fact that it forces us as a board to be held accountable by discussing this at this level at least once a year with numbers attached and dollars attached. This is a really good discussion that I enjoy very much every year. I think it's really, really important. And I think one of the most important things is that it requires each one of us to say, these are still our metrics. These are still the things that we hold most important. Towards that, I think the tweaking has to be done carefully because the numbers are hard to compare year to year if we keep tweaking all the little things in between. So in addition to holding people to different standards, it makes it a little bit apples and oranges for us as we look back at your data. I'm not bored by your number data, Tyler. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah.
My question for you is going back to last year about the MSUB thing. My recollection is that we tweaked the weight factors, the little underneath things, and that it was going to affect MSUB, and it looked like it was going to cost them $250,000. My question is, did that come to fruition, and did they earn it back? Are those the two things, and did we think about allowing the earn back partly in response to that problem?
Mr. Chair, Regent Sheehy, yes, no.
Okay.
We didn't tweak it, though, because we hadn't approved the model yet. So we were still in the process of approving the model. So the model hadn't been adopted. But right before it came to the regions, we pulled back on some of the multipliers for bonus points.
The bonus.
And it did affect MSUB, absolutely. And they did earn it back. But when they earned it back, I hadn't even thought about that topic since that time.
They weren't causally related.
No.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Babbitt.
Yes, one of the things faculty are concerned about is the funding for dual enrollment. There's support for developing the courses, helping to maintain the quality of those courses and enhancing them. Is the number of dual enrollment students, is that included at all in the FTE, which is basically how much money they can earn by doing the dual enrollment?
Mr. Chair, Professor Babbitt? It is included in FTE. Yes, we get FTE for that, and as a result, it drives part of our allocation formula. Yes.
Thank you, Chair. As a new regent, I think this is was a fascinating tool for me to take a look at and to kind of get a sense of what we value as a university system, where we're at on some of these key metrics. And as Regent Homan mentioned, there's some really good things for us to celebrate in terms of increases in degrees awarded and some retention rates that have gone up. But I'm curious if this has been a tool that we've looked at trends across both campuses and across the university system and used the trends as a way to sort of share what's working across campuses and to identify some of those areas that aren't not working well. So I'm looking at, dual enrollment is definitely one of the things that jumps out here. And, I think someone mentioned thinking about putting dual enrollment within the four-year institutions. That might be an interesting idea. Then the other trend that I saw was maybe more on the negative side was that our retention rates with our underrepresented group is, across all the campuses were pretty low. So I wasn't sure if we're looking at those trends from a university system and then sharing across the system what's working, what's not working.
Mr. Chair, Regent Lozar, that is an excellent question, and I can't give you a definitive answer for it. We certainly do from the system office. We could do more, though. There's no doubt. The one that struck me was the retention rates at Highlands and the remedial success at Highlands, and I have an inkling that Highlands is using Ed Ready. But I myself haven't connected all those dots. Maybe we could hear later from Dr. Seck on how campuses are working together. I think we're just beginning to use this data right here to do that. I know campuses talk, but I'm not positive they do in terms of progress in these metrics. And this is an easy tool for us to point out who's succeeding in these areas, obviously. So I think it's a great tool. I think we could use it a heck of a lot more extensively, though.
Thank you. President Cruzado.
Yes, Mr. Chair, 2 points. Number one, even though it has been mentioned before, but I think that President Engstrom and I have had to field many, many questions about, this is not a bonus. So many people think that this is a bonus that institution can earn. This is money that we earn back, right? So I think that distinction is absolutely essential. And again, both of us have found ourselves in different circumstances trying to clarify that for the public. The second thing is, there might be a way in which we can improve some of the process. I think that the metrics are good, again, with the provisos that we have mentioned. But here's an interesting thing that we had just discovered, and it's in regards to MSU billings. So MSU billings has now earned back the $760,000 from last year. But then we received notification in January, which means that we need to spend that money before June the 30th, which means that it really curtails the ability of the campus to reinvest those dollars in initiatives and strategies that can really address retention and graduation matters. And what I don't want for us is to then spend that money in other initiatives that are not conducive to them continue to make progress next year. So I don't know what the answer for that is. Tyler, if we then give them the money later, or if we conduct this analysis earlier, but that is something that needs to be addressed in the process.
Mr. Chair, President Cruzado, I agree 100%. The process needs to be worked on. You can use that money in the next year of the biennium, though. So we have the biennium to spend the money.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments? President Engstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Deputy Commissioner Trevor, could you just talk a little bit more about what we might anticipate in the next few years? We all know the demographics of Montana, and that has allowed us to have pretty high numbers of graduates these last few years. But as that starts to catch up with us, that's going to present a particular challenge in the number of degrees awarded. And that is just resident degrees. Is that correct, or that's total?
Total.
Non-resident can, okay. So could you just comment a little bit on sort of the size of our own demographic shift relative to the potential for increase in graduation numbers through improved retention, dual credit, the other positive factors, how they balance out against the declining demographic factor that we face as a system?
Mr. Chair, President Engstrom, I think that kind of brought that notion you just talked about there is the reason why we need to take a look at do we have enough metrics for the regional four-year campuses? Because completions are going to be hard to come by if all things remain equal. We haven't felt the full effect of a loaded or unloaded pipe, in other words, of the kind of the lower level of high school graduates that we've hit and that we're going to stay at for quite a while now. So when that matures, we're going to find the real level of university enrollment. I believe we're very close to it, in fact. But there still may be some refining that gets done there. That'll have an effect, if all things remain equal, on if you don't change your retention rates, you're going to basically graduate. Your graduation rates are going to stay the same. But we're talking about increasing the number of completions, which means we're not talking about graduation rates. You can get people to come back. You can get non-traditional students, the 140,000 that are in our population, to come to your institution, incentivize them to come there, who may have they have some college. They may be able to find a path to a degree or a certificate for that matter, because at our two-year campuses, this is, I didn't talk about this, but we count associate degrees and certificates. The new certificate that we count is the completion of technical studies, which is part of the Rev-Up grant, which is between, I believe, 9 and 16 credits. Those count now. So there's a mechanism for a two-year campus right there to kind of fight the demographic trends, along with some of their other metrics that they have, like dual enrollment. and so forth. The four-year campuses, obviously, it gets a little dicier because we're talking about students that declare majors and they're there to get a four-year degree for the most part. Although inside of graduate degrees, we also allow graduate certificates, which is a growing population. So that has an ability to keep a campus above or buoyant, and obviously increasing retention and the focus on retention. Retention is the name of the game. Obviously, it helps overall enrollment, and it keeps more students. We can model out what that looks like when you increase your retention rate by 5%, how many more students stay at your campus and how many more completions you have. So I think we have kind of a nice symbiotic relationship here between a number count and a percent that measures student success. It's really going to be interesting to see how it plays out, though, as you say, with these demographics that we're up against.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, I would just say, I think what Tyler was speaking to there at the end is some of the avenues that we have. President Engstrom, certainly you articulate the challenge, and that will be our challenge. But you got to remember what was driving this is not the status quo. It's the legislature and, frankly, the governor saying, as a state, as a society, as an economy, we need more people to move through higher education and get some form of degree. If we roll back, certainly demographics present a challenge for us. But at the same time, the challenge and the target laid before us by the governor and the legislature was, how do we get a higher percentage of Montana adults with some form of post-secondary education, and the goals laid out across the country at a much higher rate. That's our own challenge, but I think we've got to look past the challenge and really focus on how do we get there. And I think it's going to, it's what this is driving. We can't simply be okay with the status quo, and I know you're not suggesting that, but we've got to look at retention. We've got to look at re-engaging adult learners, retooling, retraining, so that we have a greater population of Americans with some sort of post-secondary education. That's what all this is driving. Frankly, that's what the legislature is trying to reward. That's why the governor put it in his budget. That's something he's been committed to. And so I think it still pushes us in the area we need to go. If we rely simply on Montana demographics, we are in some serious trouble reaching both the governor's goals, the legislature's goals, and our own. We're going to have to look to non-resident students. We're going to have to look to re-engaging adult learners. We're going to have to improve our retention and completion rates. So I think this drives that, but you're right. We're faced with a challenge, and Tyler alluded to it. I think there will be years under this model, not everyone gets full funding. In fact, I'm almost assured of that, but it still drives us the direction we need to go.
Thank you, Commissioner. Mr. York.
Chairman Tuss and members of the board, I want to point out that we still have one area that we can mine outside of the decreasing demographics. Year in and year out on student voice surveys that we conduct through about 40% of the state, 85% of the 6th to 12th graders we survey indicate that going on to further education is an important part of their future life. Well, we're only grabbing about 57% or 60% of those kids. So through dual enrollment, through other activities, we can overcome some of the demographic problems by getting more kids to go to school. So, thanks.
Thank you. That's a great reminder. Additional comments or questions from the board? I think this has been a great conversation. Very good questions, great answers. Deputy Commissioner, thank you very much. Are we ready to move on to the next topic, Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, we are. And you all are going to be thrilled with a double dose of Tyler Trevor this morning. The next item on the Commissioner's report is a brief overview of the Montana Legislative Audit Division's performance audit. So you all know we are audited from legislative fiscal on a variety of financial things. And you will see in budget later today, I think there's 14 or 16 of those to come before you. But the legislature also has the latitude to occasionally reach out and do performance audits where they can pick, frankly, any topic they want. They did that from directions out of the last session, and they looked at the MUS as a whole and at least addressed the topic of what has happened with administrative expenses. And, the audit's been completed. We went in front of the Legislative Audit Committee early February. I'm incredibly pleased with the audit findings, and Tyler's going to go through those. They also had a few recommendations, and I will tell you that we completely concur with those recommendations. In fact, we've frankly identified those ourselves and are things we've been working on along the way. I think this will give us a little boost to elevate those to even higher urgency level. But it was a great audit, and it really dug down into how does the administrative expense compare to other states, compare to ourselves, and overall the percentage of our budget that is getting spent on those type of activities. So once again, Tyler Trevor will lead us through this conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I guess one of my greatest fears is not public speaking, but one of my greatest fears is public speaking on a boring topic and having everybody look down and basically disengage. I'm going to try everything I can to make sure that does not happen here. So, and it may mean moving faster than I originally anticipated, but please bear with me here as we talk about the basics and objectives of this audit. This was tabbed as an administrative cost audit. It ended up being more of an audit on HR data. You can split it basically in two halves. The first half is a comparison of MSU and U of M to their peers, various peer groups, on various indicators of administrative cost. Then there's a second half of the audit that looks at quality of HR data. That's where the recommendations are. And so I'm going to spend the first 5 or so minutes here talking with you about the first half, which is going to look at this peer analysis. So, and then I now have 3 areas instead of 2 on the board, but the peer analysis, then we're going to talk in terms of data quality in how we categorize employees in the system, and also how accurate our data is. So,
in peer analysis, 2 things to add. One, they chose MSU and U of M because that's where 80 or 70% of our students are. So that they didn't want to do it system-wide, but they wanted as representative of the system as they could. The second thing is on the peer groups, and I'm sure you'll get to this, but they allowed us to choose our peer groups, and then they chose a set of peer groups for us also. So you'll have all 3 of those bars, our expense, the peer group that we chose, peer group that they chose on these charts.
Yeah, so what makes this really interesting is that we have an independent third party looking at us, employed by the legislature, to determine whether or not our campuses have too many employees and too much administrative costs. That gets everybody's attention in a hurry. There's the metrics. I'm going to walk you through those 6 ones, which starts with total employees, pretty basic. And so the graphs are going to look like this. We have MSU, we have U of M, and you kind of get used to the color scheme that they have here. This is straight out of the audit. We have on the left there is MSU and these in the kind of the orange, and then the LAD peers are the Legislative Audit Division peer group, which took more of a wider range across the nation, where the campus peers used a little bit more of geography, but they have all kinds of factors in there like enrollment and you know, mission and whatnot. A lot is put into these peers, and it is very, you just trust me, you don't want to mess with campus peer groups. It's something they own those, and legislative audit found that out. That's why the campus peer groups are in here and legislative audit peer groups are in here. So it makes for an interesting dynamic. Our bars, both on the University of Montana and Montana State, are the lowest, and you're going to find that a trend on every one of these metrics. And so you see we have fewer employees. I want to say one thing about this. So we talk about this in the operating budget, and when we review the operating budget, we're looking at current unrestricted funds, what those are used for. Remember, current unrestricted funds are state appropriations plus tuition. Those are the funds we use to fund our educational operations. We then have, and that makes up, let's just say, 500 million of our 1.5 billion. Okay, then we have, you can put the agencies in there on top of that, and then you have all of the other operations that occur on campus. Well, a lot of these slides are involving all of the operations, not just current unrestricted. So the number amounts are different than what you see in the operating budget, but the overall trends remain the same. So you can see here, total employees, we have fewer. There's more at MSU than U of M. You'll do that comparison. One of the reasons the agencies are in here, MSU has more agencies. Okay, student to staff ratios. And you just take the total number of students and you divide it, and then you use that as the numerator, and you divide the total number of staff into it, and you come up with a ratio of, at MSU, for instance, it's about 5 to 1, and it's better than their peers. And at U of M's higher over there, it's 6.5 to 1. And you might say, well, what's going on? We thought they had fewer students. Well, it was a couple of years ago, but also at the same time, we're talking about all funds again. So it's a little bit different than what we're used to looking at in the operating budget. But the point here is to compare us to these peers. And we have better student to faculty ratios, meaning more students in relationship to the number of people that are employed on campus. So they come up with a conclusion. MSU and U of M have fewer FTE overall and higher student to staff ratio when measured against peer institutions around the country. So they put that section away. Now we're going to take a look at instructional FTE ratio. So this is just the percent of the employees on your campus that are in the instructional category. Again, all funds. We're talking about the guy who cleared off the snow in the bleachers before the football game. He's in this. So that's why these ratios are a little bit different here when it's only 7% are dedicated to instruction. We're in an all fund category. But what we do see when we look at this, again, the importance is comparison to the peers. We're very similar to our peers. And then you can add into this to what they call the core mission of employees, instructional, research, and public service. Put all those into a category and say what percent of them are on campus in relationship to the total number of employees. And again, we compare very favorably and similar to our peers, which I just added in this slide, which is current unrestricted funds, just to make sure I did not forget to tell you about the difference between what we're looking at and current unrestricted. But we don't have to go through that. So the conclusion by the auditors was we have similar percents of staff FTE tied to the core mission. Okay, metric number 4, instructional support per FTE. This is what we would call, during our operating budget, current unrestricted funds per FTE. Now we're talking about a metric that we utilize. They just named it a little bit different. And so then we compare that to our peers. And really, to me, this is how efficient you are. These are your state appropriations plus the amount of tuition revenue divided by the number of students you have. It is traditionally been a comparison, a metric that we have done, and we've said statements before, we are 50th in the nation. So it was nobody around the table or involved in this audit from our side is surprised that we're lower than our peers. And then we take administrative costs, and these administrative costs then switch to the expenditure side instead of the revenue side. But when you do that, you look at institutional support, academic support, and student services. That's what they said is they used as administration. And then they used it in a per FTE basis. And we're once again lower than all of our peers. So the conclusion, MSU and U of M spend less on instruction, which we know is the overall amount of state appropriations and tuition, and administrative costs per student, FTE, when measured against the peers. Okay, so they did all that analysis, but they came up with one kind of anomaly. So we spend less, we have less administrative costs, but then in IPEDS is our kind of big-time national reporting mechanism that we report all kinds of different data to the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education. They pointed this out, like, hey, this is weird. You guys have more in the category, when we look at occupational categories, both campuses have way more in the management category than you would expect. In fact, they went on to say, hey, we got so interested in this, we called up other campuses that were in your peer group and say, have you noticed anything like this? And they said, oh yeah, we've noticed stuff like that before, and we just recategorized people so it shrunk our categories of management and kind of split it out. We could have done that, but we didn't. And I think this starts to get into the next part of the audit, which talks about categories and the use of HR data and our ability to do stuff like that. And so with that said, that's kind of the end of the peer bit. And I'm going to move on. Well, the final conclusion. Although Montana universities compare favorably, we basically still need to pay attention to better workforce. They call it workforce. I call it HR data. We need to be able to measure things and have more detail related to HR data. And without a doubt, we agree with this. We've been talking about this for a couple of years. Every time we talk about the operating budget, we talk about just that. We need better HR data. So that ends the peer part. If there are any questions, we'll go into phase 2, which is the recommendations related to the HR data. Okay, before we get to the actual recommendation, they focused a lot on a categorization model. So they looked at the accessibility and availability of our HR data, particularly at the system office. So now this is one of those deals where I'm sitting up and listening, and they basically say, hey, look you guys have higher level data. You have the ability to do these kind of the operating budget report that you've created in the past, but fundamentally, this is insufficient to detailed analysis of employees. And I don't disagree with that. I might tell you there's 2,000 faculty at an individual campus in an operating budget report, but you couldn't ask me to scratch the surface on those 2,000 FTE and tell you who those people are and what department they work in. The campuses do, but rolled up as a system, we have not had that availability like we do with student data and like we do with finance data. In essence, we haven't created an HR data warehouse. And so they say, look also inside your data, we're finding some inconsistencies in employee categorization between the campuses. And we were like, really? That's a surprise. But they say, there are national models you could be using for categorizing employees. We're not talking about classifying employees. We're not talking about paying employees, anything related to this. We're talking about just sheerly categorizing them, and do more than just categorize them as administrator, faculty, classified. Use that, but get a little broader in your general categorizations, but then use a coding system that also relates back to function of those positions. So we might be able to say, in your operating budget, how many IT FTE do you have on each campus that are dedicated to information technology? And actually ask that question and answer it consistently between institutions. We don't have the ability to do that right now. Man, would it be neat if we did. So that, in a nutshell, gets you to recommendation 1, which is we recommend the Board of Regents through the Office of the Commissioner of Higher Education work with the Montana University System units to establish a system-wide categorization model. In fact, they even went so far as to pick one off from North Carolina and apply it to our data. And they were successful at it. So they demonstrated in front of us, you can do this. And saying to the legislature, they should do it. And we said unequivocally, we will. We're going to get her done, and we're going to get her done by July 1, 2017. And the way we're going to do it is we're going to develop an HR data task force, the exact same way we did performance funding, and we are going to take a look at what model we want to adopt and how we're going to apply it to this data and how we develop an HR data warehouse at the system office. So come 2017 operating budget report, the statements that I made about the earlier are not true. We actually have granular, detailed data at the system office that we can answer questions like the IT question. Okay, so then they went into Banner. Like, it wasn't enough, all right? So then they went into Banner, and they said, hey, is it accurate? And we're like, well, we sure think it is. And so they reviewed like 560 equal amounts. It was a sample at each campus, and they did find some inconsistencies in data. But 87% of the data were accurate. And what they were looking at was, does your job title match your job function? Does your position title match your position number? And you can see all the examples there, and they came up with 13% where we were off. And my quick analysis of this is, HR data, the number one thing you got to do is pay people. You got to get them paid, and you got to get them paid accurately. And when you have less administrative funds, you can't dedicate all of this effort. You should, but at times when you can't, you just make sure you get the core set of data in HR right to get people paid. And that's some of what's happened to us over time. This made us sit up and pay attention, and it came out with a recommendation that said, university system units should establish procedures to review HR data in Banner and to ensure it's accurate. So we absolutely concurred with this, and we believe that this HR data task force can also incorporate portions of this kind of procedural check on quality of data in Banner, source data we're talking about here, and that's where we're talking about putting these employee categorization codes in the source data. So we think we have a mechanism in place to ensure that this is going to occur moving forward. Finally, they wanted to make sure that the data that we're providing to the federal government, IPEDS, which every institution in America does, is accurate and has some sort of consistency between campuses. And what they found was there's all kinds of ambiguity with IPEDS reporting. And I would agree completely. I've had the role of reporting IPEDS from a campus perspective, and it's following government regulations, and there's a ton of ways to interpret it. But they said, yeah, we don't care about that. Just make sure you do it consistently within your system. And we said, totally, we agree with this. This should be accurate. In fact, why wouldn't we be able to do this consistent if we had a consistent HR data warehouse? So it all kind of starts melding together, and you see where we're going with this. You'll hear me talk, hopefully not too soon, but maybe at the next meeting, about an update on an HR data task force effort and where we're at with that. I'm certainly not alone. Deputy Commissioner McCrae is leading the charge from the HR side. We have IT people looking at this. This is if those of you with about 10 to 15 years of history, we developed a student data warehouse under the same kind of complaints, probably. We developed a finance warehouse because we couldn't answer questions at the system office like we should have, and to help alleviate work at the campuses and operating budget reports. And the HR data warehouse is in the same vein. So there you go, Mr. Chair. That concludes my report.
Thank you for that report, Regent Johnstone.
Thank you, Chair. Kyla, what's the relationship between this initiative and the what you've discussed with us before, the need to develop, improve an integrated, comprehensive, better data system across the system? Are they unrelated? Are they related? Can we do this without that?
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnstone, they are related in essence, that in order, if we were going to have one version of Banner, for instance, that would be the ultimate version of integration, you have to normalize all of the codes and business practices that occur on campus so you're funneling consistent data, because you only have one choice of codes. You don't have 11. And this job categorization is reflective of something that would need to be done, but with every single data element related to HR, finance, and student. So we're picking just one area, kind of like Common Course numbering we did, to normalize the codes across the system in the source data. That needs to be done for everyone and every code to get a truly integrated system. This is a method of integration via data warehouse. And so you get some of the reasons people say we need to integrate is because we need better data and we need better reporting capabilities. This will get us to that. Some of the reasons people say you need to integrate is because we need student access between campuses to seamlessly enroll. We're not getting to that. Or employees employed at more than one campus with a single ID. We're not getting to that. We're getting to one set of codes that are going to be consistent, that are going to be very critical, like Common Course numbering, to allow us to see transparently and accurately and consistently the number of employees by campus.
What's the investment necessary to do this?
Mr. Mr. Chair, Regent Albrecht. Initially, we have no funding for this. This is on the back of people who are employed in the system. Unlike Common Core numbering, we did have a state appropriation to do it, some of it. So I can't tell what the level of resources and effort that's going to be at the campus. At the system level, this is just in our positions, and this is what we're going to do. This is an initiative. The campuses, this is on top of what they already do, and we know that my example of just trying to get it right, to get people paid right, is kind of some of the way we're at. So this will have an impact on campuses, but hopefully it's not as large as one might think. But that's me being optimistic, and I would hate to speak for a task force that probably has people on that would disagree completely with that statement. So my answer is I'm not sure.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, Regent Albrecht, that's a good question, and I think Tyler's answered it accurately. I made a comment earlier that we've already been working towards some of this. I mean, these are things that we know we need to do. I think, honestly, there's not only do we concur with the recommendations, but the campuses do. It's sort of like one of those, yeah, we know we need to do it. It's going to be a burden to do it. Well, I think everybody concurs we need to get it done. We've set out a pretty aggressive timeline to comply. I think legislative audits we take very seriously, and we want to move toward reaching their goals as well. So that may impose a bit more burden. But, you know, those are issues we'll have to work through on campus and reallocate where we need to try to make sure that we can both comply with the audit and get where we need to be. In the end, I think we will be a more efficient system. As we sort of grapple with this at our office where the data is inconsistent. We definitely grapple with it at board meetings when we are always having asterisks by each set of data because we always compare a little different. Why does one group have more professional staff than the other? Those are questions that will get answered with this. So in the end, I think we create efficiency, but it's going to be a hurdle to get over, one that we're very committed to.
I think it's also important, and we talked about this in a committee meeting, that as the impending potential of changes in proposed bills for exempt and non-exempt, some of those rules change. That's incredibly concerning, and we need to make sure we're ahead of the game here. So I just want to make sure to point that out.
Additional questions? Additional questions? Regent Johnston, or Regent Nystuen?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I debated about asking this question or not because it's a loaded one. You know, I applaud the metrics and the efficiencies and those 6 data points. We're much better than our peers. But are we at risk of sacrificing quality and success because we're too lean in places?
I think the honest answer is yes. I think those are things that we really have to balance. And along with that are long-term things that this board's balanced, which is tuition and cost of education for a Montana student. We've made a lot of headway with the tuition freeze in terms of getting new state funding to offset some of what would have been an increase. But that's the balancing point. And while we've made headway, especially in 2-year in some of those areas to get closer to the western state average, we still take a bigger bite out of family income in Montana than most surrounding states. So, you know, we can't say, well, we fixed that piece and now what do we do? But those are the balance points for sure. We've known this. We know we're one of the more lean states on what we spend in administrative oversight. But yeah, there's some great things that come to mind. Including a lot of things that we've dealt with and that we need to continue to deal with. Financial awareness issues, suicide prevention, campus safety. I mean, those are all things that sort of fall under that administrative cost. We can't be the lowest provider on that and do all that we need to do. But that's the balancing point. I think we're proud of the results. But we need to continue to monitor those closely.
Regent Lozar.
Mr. Chair, kind of going back to the first part of this report and thinking about the origin of why we went through this report, thinking about what the legislature was thinking, potentially what the general public may be thinking in regards to our administrative costs. Are they too high? We've got a report here that says that we compare favorably, and we've done I'm sure, a great report to one legislative committee. But I think we have an opportunity here to maybe share this a little beyond that room and beyond this room so that we can sort of get ahead of the game and talking about where we're at with our administrative costs. So it's just something that I think we need to think about from a system perspective of what can we do to share this information beyond these walls.
Thank you, Regent Lozar. Additional questions, additional comments? Seeing none, thank you.
Mr. Chair, next item on our agenda is a quick update on College Application Week. College Application Week is a great effort and a cooperative one between us and Superintendent Juneau's office and K-12 partners in reaching out and getting high school partners to help us at a period of time get students to enroll in our institutions or others for that matter. We offer some incentives to students to do that, financial incentives, and Zach is here today to give us a little update on what's going on there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner, Mr. Chair, and Regents. Yeah, this is the third year that we have done a statewide College Application Week, and I'm pleased to say that for the second straight year, we had every post-secondary institution across the state, including private and tribal colleges, participated. So students had the opportunity to submit applications to any campus that they might be interested to apply to. Just real quick, College Application Week is really a national initiative. There is either an initiative or a pilot in all 50 states, and additionally, for the past 2 years, the President has declared the month of November as College Application Month. So Montana came on board in 2011 with it was written into our Gear Up grant. And we've seen steady growth with this particular initiative. This year we had 3,231 applications submitted. You can kind of see the numbers up there, and they're also in the report. And I think, this is an increase of almost 500 from 2014. So again, we're pleased with that. You can see that the bulk of those applications do go to the flagships. But it's also a growth of over 1,400 applications from the first year that we did this statewide in 2013. So, and I would also just point out that we show modest growth in applications submitted to two-year institutions, which I think suggests that students are looking at all campus options when they are considering where they want to send their application. If we could have the next slide, please. So I think, again, at the post-secondary level, we have everybody participating, everybody supportive. On the K-12 side, I'll just highlight a couple things. In addition to the figure that Chair Tuss referenced about the 24% first generation, you'll see there that the student survey data also indicates that 65% of students indicated that they were free and reduced lunch eligible, which means that we are sort of hitting the low-income student side with this initiative. But I think it's also important to recognize that the structured support side, which is the schools, the high schools, we had 120 high schools this year that took the opportunity to use this initiative to provide structured support sometime in their week, within the classroom, to help all students navigate the application process, which for a lot of high school students, this is their first exposure to something like this. It can be challenging, it can be a little bit confusing, And so we have a lot of data here that really shows from the site coordinators and the students that not just getting the application submitted, but just understanding the process is a critical piece of this that's helping raise college and career awareness in our high schools all over the state. So I think that's a very significant part of this initiative as well. I do want to thank all the campus leaders that are here for your support of this initiative. I think statewide support is huge. Also, I'd just mention, obviously, the leaders of our tribal and private colleges. I think we're doing a good job. We're pleased with the growth. We will be convening a work group soon to start looking at this initiative for 2016. And I think a lot of that conversation will be centered in how we handle the changes to the FAFSA, because now with the prior year, some campuses are going to be moving up their financial aid priority deadlines. And so we'll have to factor that into how we move forward. But again, thank you, and that concludes my report, and I would entertain any questions.
Thank you. I do have one question. I like this program and I like these numbers, but obviously they represent applications. Do you track these high school students and whether or not they end up being college students in the fall?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This year we changed the way that this data was reported. For the first 2 years that we did this statewide, we, being the Gear Up office, collected the student names and where they applied from the high schools. What we found was that data was not always good data. You can imagine when you're trying to get student lists from 120 high schools and coordinating with site coordinators who are usually counselors, we don't always get complete data. Additionally, there were issues like if a student finished their application at home or something like this, and the campus considered it, because it came from that high school, a college application week application, yet the site coordinator was not made aware of that. They wouldn't have included that student in their calculus. So what we've done to sort of get around some of those issues is we just sent out a list to campus admissions and said, these are the high schools that are participating. If you receive applications from these high schools during this week, you can assume that it's a college application week application. And then they sent us their student lists. So I think there is an opportunity now that we have good data to start to look at those conversion rates. And I know that in the conversations that I've had with admissions people about this, that is one of the key topics that they're interested in. So I think there is an opportunity to look at that this year when we start looking at
Very good. I'd love to see that data. Regent Johnstone.
Thank you, Chair Tuss. You asked my first question, but my second question is, I was astonished by the percentage of these students that qualify for free lunch programs. I mean, if I'm doing the math right, there are 2,000 students. What's the percentage of our students, I guess high school seniors, that qualify for free lunch programs? Do you have any idea? I was amazed by that statistic.
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnstone, I do not know that, to be honest with you. What I do know, I mean, two things I would factor in here. That's self-reported. So, some students, may or may not have an accurate estimate of whether or not they qualify. And I do know that there's been some changes at the federal level in how this is calculated. So, for example, if a school has a certain percentage of students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, their whole school essentially is a free and reduced lunch school. So I think those two factors, I don't know the number, but I think those two factors probably play into this.
Thank you.
Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, Regent Johnstone, those numbers, though, aren't a long ways off of what, I was looking for Tyler, I think he stepped out, but they're not a long ways off of what Pell and other markers would suggest for Montana. We're a high-need state. And then I would just like to add, again, a thanks to Superintendent Juneau, her office, Steve, Dennis Parman. This all happens at the high school. So while we participate and we report to the board on the good work we're doing, all that work happens in the high schools, and it's really the good work they're doing to make this a positive experience, and we really do appreciate the efforts there.
Additional questions or comments? Suri.
A little bit to follow up on the commissioner's comment, maybe this is a question for Steve. How, if there's 120 schools, high schools participating, how do we grow that number and make sure that every student has the opportunity to participate in this week and have the opportunities? And then a second, just to follow up to Regent Johnstone's question, I think it is about 70% statewide for free and reduced lunch. And again, Steve might know that better.
Chair Tuss, members of the committee. 120 high schools represents, if I do my math right, about 72%. I think we have just over 170 high schools in the state. I haven't been involved with this deeply with Zach. I know it's been a huge effort, and I don't know. He may have the answer to why we have 50 high schools that we haven't been able to tap into yet. I think most of this work is happening through the counseling departments of the high schools, so I would guess it's a connection in that direction. But I can't tell you why we don't have 50, but 120 out of 170 that's an impressive number. So as far as the free and reduced numbers go, I think it's closer overall to the 50% range, 50 to 55 statewide. I'm going to look that up as we speak here so that we give you accurate information. But it is high. It is high.
Thank you, Mr. York. Regent Albrecht.
I was visiting Great Falls recently, and I don't know if you can pull that up, what I sent to you. But I was impressed with, when I was walking down the hallways of Great Falls High, that the teachers outside of their rooms had Mr. Donnelly, graduate of Montana State University Billings, ask me about it. And what I've realized, and it went all the way down the hallway, and I was so impressed with it because for me, I grew up with a large family, and we all went to college. And as the youngest, I was influenced by my siblings and my parents. Now these kids who are don't have those positive influences really need the culture around them to encourage them. And so my question is, how, when you have some of these best practices, how is there some communication amongst the high schools, et cetera, and then are you able to throw that net out to ensure that the high schools across the state are trying to bring those students in and use those kind of mechanisms to bring that appeal to those students, especially those who don't have the positive influences?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Vice Chair Albrecht. Essentially what we do is it's a letter between Commissioner Christian and Superintendent Juneau that goes out to all high schools, offering them the opportunity to sign up. But they do have to assure that they will provide the structured support piece, which I think goes a little bit to Ms. Smiley's question about why some aren't doing it. Maybe they just don't want to do the structured support. But once they've signed up, essentially what we do is we hold 2 webinars where we ask that every site coordinator participate in one of those webinars, and we talk them through the process. We talk them through where they can, there's a lot of resources on our website. We steer them to the website, so we try to get that communication out there. I also do a quick blurb at the counselor's update that MOPSOC puts on. But specific to your question, we, through the American Council of Education, who has sort of spearheaded this initiative nationwide, they have a ton of resources. And so those are on our website. And they offer ideas like exactly what you're describing, having your faculty during that week, say where they went to college, bringing in volunteers, reaching out to, regional or local campuses, seeing if someone from their campus would come in and assist. So that's how we provide those resources to schools, and we just encourage them to make this initiative as robust as possible in their school, because again, I think exactly what you're speaking to, When you see that in a school, I think it really feeds this concept of a college-going culture.
Additional questions or comments? Seeing none, Commissioner?
Mr. Chair, the campus reports are next on our agenda, and they are listed there. Hopefully, they're providing relevant information. Any feedback along the way, we will try to incorporate into those. I think they're a very useful tool for you all as regents. Under other, I would like to have, so deep roots in community college is no surprise, but Regent Nystone was invited to participate in a legislative review with the American Association of Community Colleges in DC, and he did that on our behalf, and would like to just have him share a few thoughts of what is on the community college agenda from a national perspective.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Commissioner, thank you. During my 13 years on the board of Flathead Valley Community College, I had the privilege of attending their Association of Community College Trustees National Legislative Summit back in DC each February, and that usually coincides with release of the president's budget. Each year, the community colleges from across the nation, over 1,000 of trustees, almost all from the private sector, go back and learn about all the federal legislative priorities of the community colleges, and then go up to Capitol Hill and call on their senators and representatives to really convey half a dozen top priorities from the community college perspective as our congressional delegation weighs on whether or not these issues are important. In preparation for this, I recently read several articles in the recent issue of Trustee Quarterly, which is from the Association of Governing Bodies, along with the Association of Community College Trustees and the recent Wall Street Journal of February 20th, some interesting statistics about college affordability. And it was probably the cornerstone of our discussion with the congressional delegation. And what I'd really like to do is continue to dovetail that great information that ACCT provides into the university system as a whole. A couple of quick statistics is the two-year public colleges represent the lowest priced higher education institution, averaging $3,434 in annual tuition and fees per full-time student in 2015 and 16. Now that's not necessarily here in Montana, but nationwide that's the number. So $3,434 is the number, but for four-year it's $9,400. And for a private four-year, that's $32,400. So you can see the community colleges really do provide a good valued education. Tuition and fees don't cover all that the students are required. There's books, there's supplies, there's transportation, housing, other living expenses. The average cost of attendance of a community college commuter student nationwide is $16,000. The maximum Pell Grant, though, is only $5,775, leaving quite a shortfall of $11,000 that are going unmet needs for students if they're receiving a Pell Award. The harsh reality is students would have to work at least 30 hours a week at a minimum wage job of $7.25 an hour to bridge that gap. Burdens fall particularly heavy on the students from low-income families, according to AGB. Even after a grant aid from all sources included, they must still find a way to finance an equivalent of 76% of their family income, while the highest income, it's only about 17%. It's now the norm for U.S. students across the nation from the lowest income bracket to borrow at least half of their household income to attend most four-year universities, again on a nationwide basis. Many students don't have to take out the large loans to cover those needs, living costs, not just tuition and fees. Borrowers in the class of 2013 owed an average of $28,400 in federal and private loans, and student debt is now hovering at $1.3 trillion, something that I know I see every day as a banker, the amount of student loans that are on the right-hand side of people's personal balance sheets. Pell Grants, the mainstay of college affordability, according to AGB, for low-income students just hasn't kept up with the cost of college. The grant once covered about 3/4 of the cost of attending a four-year college. Today, it's about 1/3. That's a big number. So The Association of Community College Trustees, by the way, I asked Deputy Commissioner Trevor this morning, so can you put these numbers as far as Pell here in the state of Montana into context with regards to our tuition dollars we receive and state appropriations? And he's got some fabulous presentations in that, but this is just a quick observation here that here in Montana, Pell grants total around, let's call it $65 million. 62 to $670 million. That's a big dollar that comes into our university system to help fund our lower income students. Tuition for the two, for Bozeman and Missoula and all the units is $283 million. So put that in the context of, let's say it's 70 million divided by 280, a quarter of the dollars that are going into ultimately that are paid to tuition is coming from Pell Grants. Here at state appropriations, it looks like we get about $220 million, and again, Pell provides 70 million. So they may not be totally related, but just in the context of, we're talking serious dollars here. So long story short, there are 6 Pell initiatives that the community colleges are dialed into. Part of it is to maintain the success of the program, and the community college trustees go back and continue to advocate for that. Talking about year-round Pell Grant, that was something that was a takeaway a number of years ago through some of the budget issues back in Washington, D.C. They want to reinstate some of the eligibility to benefit the ability to benefit students that lack a high school diploma or a GED that have proven abilities. They'd like to extend the time frame for Pell to go from to a total of 14 equivalent semesters. That used to be 18, dialed back to 12. They're looking to advocate it up to 14. And finally, to allow additional access to Pell Grants for short-term workforce-oriented types of programs. So that's just one of the things that we talk to our congressional folks about. There are a number of other items, such as the funding, the Higher Education Reauthorization Act. The Americans College Promise is something that's gaining some traction. While a lot of folks think that this is, community college free for 2 years is a federal state initiative where the federal government would pay 75% and the state 25%. A number of the states are significantly looking at this as being, how do we connect those dots, bridge those gaps here right now? We believe that the state of Tennessee and Oregon has already got wheels up on this type of a program, and there are others around the country that are looking for it as well, to provide responsible students a 2-year college education at community colleges. So there are a number of other items relating to the Perkins Acts and changing up some tax code things. In closing, the other thing that we did is provided an opportunity to tell our congressional delegation about the $40 million that we received in 2 major statewide tax grants, the Rev Up Montana and the healthcare grants. We've been good stewards of those dollars, and we provided some data and some analytics to support how important those types of initiatives are. We can never take for granted the work that our congressional delegation does to help support these types of initiatives. What we need to do is continue to send the message. So a lot of the information as we're getting out of these trustee magazines and so forth really talks about the data. We had a rich discussion about that this morning. I think I'm impressed at how well Montana is doing. Mr. Commissioner, you and your team are doing a great job, I think, in starting to determine how do we, just our performance funding model really supports what nationwide universities and community colleges are doing to be able to share their story and to advocate for more. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Nystuen. Commissioner?
I think, I didn't mean to buzz in before questions if there are any, otherwise we are ready to move on. Regent Nystuen,
any
thanks
questions? Seeing none. Thank you. And next, we're at the board education topic, the WWAMI and graduate medical education. I know that Dr. Jay Erickson is here for this presentation. Commissioner, do you want to tee this up for us?
Sure, Mr. Chair. First, apologize that we don't have a break. Dr. Erickson needs to get out of here, so we're going to plow through. Might not take the full hour, but we'll get moving on it. You know, certainly this area has received some attention in the last few months. And I just think it's a great opportunity to do some board education on this topic. In some cases, the attention would make some believe that we are at odds with our tremendous partner in WWAMI, and that is certainly not the case. We very much value that relationship and also with GME. Dr. Erickson and I communicate frequently. We know it is an incredibly important part of what we do in Montana. We all worked as your team in 2013 to expand those WWAMI slots for the first time since its inception, really. And have made great headway and great investments as a state, both in WWAMI and in GME over the last couple of legislative sessions. And so we wanted to bring this topic before you. Dr. Erickson is here. Dr. Vasquez heads the GME side of this for us. He wasn't able to be here today, but we will cover both pieces of this as well as we can. These two gentlemen also presented for a legislative interim committee, about a month ago, with some great results too, but good, important topic. Mr. Chair.
Dr. Erickson, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Commissioner Christian, Chairman Tuss, and then the rest of the regents and others. Thanks for having me back. I've been before you a number of times over the last 11 years, especially when we were trying to increase class size. But I am the Assistant Dean for the Montana WWAMI program, and in that role, I oversee the clinical aspects of education for WWAMI in the state of Montana. I'm also a practicing family physician for the past 26 years in Whitefish, Montana. So today I'm going to talk about undergraduate medical education and also about graduate medical education. So as you can see, the physician pipeline is a long pipeline. My real role is in that medical school part. I'm going to talk as well about graduate medical education, which is residency, and then also talk a little bit about workforce data and a little bit about the pre-medical school pipeline as well. So WWAMI started in '71. We had our first class in 1973. It's a 5-state partnership. It is Montana's medical school. I know there's been a lot in the press about Montana needs a medical school. We have 30 students a year that enter into the WWAMI program now and complete their medical education through the WWAMI model and through the University of Washington. As you can see, WWAMI represents these 5 states, as Chairman Tuss noted, and it's about a third of the landmass, but only 3% of the population. And any which way you slice it, Montana is one of the most rural states in the country. I always like to go back to the founding goals. These were the goals in 1971, and I think we have reasonably met the first 4. I think we've gained access. We haven't spent a lot of money to do that. You'll see we've created a lot of community-based medical education, and we're working to expand GME. The big one is this issue, and that's the issue of creating more primary care physicians as well as the maldistribution of physicians, especially in geography to our rural and underserved areas. What I would say as well is that number 5 is an issue that is national. I would say there's probably no state that feels like they've met number 5. It continues to be an issue, and many states have a variety of initiatives to help meet that specific problem. So this is our education map as it stands currently. We have over 40 required clerkships in 16 different communities in Montana. It involves 350 clinical faculty, which is about 1/8 of the practicing physicians in the state are faculty for WWAMI. And again, you can see that there are clusters and concentrations where there's more of those blue boxes. That's where our required clerkships take place. I've circled Missoula, Bozeman, and Billings because we have 3rd-year tracks there where our students spend all of their 3rd year and can have the option of spending their 4th year as well. This coming year, we're going to have 10 of our students out doing rural rotations for their 3rd year, so they'll be out in a rural community for most of their 3rd year. And then we'll have 15 of the remaining 20 students back at those track sites, spending the majority of their education in Montana. So we're really proud that we've created this infrastructure that allows our students to come back and be educated here. The green dots are programs where we spend 4 weeks between the first and second year of their education in a rural or underserved community, and you can see that those really span the width of our state. And then I'll just sort of show this map because this is the WWAMI model. There's really no model like this in the U.S. that has this large amount of decentralized medical education. Most medical schools are still clustered around major metropolitan areas and academic centers, and WWAMI has really celebrated the model of moving education out into the region. And I would also point out that our students have the ability to do clerkships and rotations at any of these sites across the 5 states. But likewise, we have this coming year, about 2/3 of the students that do clerkships in our state will be from outside of Montana and represent those other 4 states. And you'll see that makes a difference in terms of our outcomes. The program I want to just highlight, this is a workforce program. I think one of the things, being one of the most rural states in the nation, and when I took over this job 11 years ago, we really didn't have a focus on I would say rural and underserved workforce. So in 2008 we started a program called TRUST, which stands for Targeted Rural Underserved Track. And it started with 3 students, and it involves a focused admissions process. So we're looking for students who are from rural areas, have a significant service background, you know, have that capability and that inclination to come back to a rural or underserved community in Montana. And so those 3 students grew to 5 students, and then when we had class expansion in the session before last, we now have 10 of our 30 students that we admit into this TRUST program. And they're matched with a community and a mentor before they start medical school. They spend 2 weeks in these 9 communities listed here before they start medical school. They'll spend a week at 3 different times during the first 18 months, and then another 4-week experience in these communities. And then finally, they spend 22 weeks in their 3rd year back doing their clinical training in these rural communities. So it's really a unique longitudinal rural experience or underserved experience. Butte is our small city in this grouping. They spend all their time at the Community Health Center in Butte. But again, it gives them this longitudinal experience with a group of mentors, a group of patients, and a community to sort of gain linkages and understanding of what it takes to practice medicine in a community that size. This is our current cohort. They started this fall in Bozeman, and you can see they come from a variety of communities around the state. They're placed at a variety of small rural communities around the state. In fact, right now we have 2 students who are finishing their 22-week experience in Dillon, their 3rd year experience, and again, sort of highlighting sort of that continuity. But we're always feeding people into this pipeline. So briefly on workforce data, again, this comes from the AAMC workforce report, which is published every year. As you can see, based on population, we actually are a little, if 25th is our average, we're a little bit above in terms of primary care physicians that are actively practicing per capita, 29th in total patient care, actually higher than average in terms of general surgeons. And then lastly, we have an older physician workforce, and as you can see, we're at 32%. So what I would say, you know, those numbers are actually better than any of our peer states. If you look at North Dakota, South Dakota, Wyoming, or Idaho, our physician population per capita is higher than those peer states. This is the pipeline. So again, in order to go to medical school or osteopathic school, we need Montana residents to be well prepared at your institutions and in the K through 12 programs. And over the last 7 years, this is the number of students on average that have attended medical school. So I want you to keep that number in mind, that 54. And then on average, there's been 19 Montana residents that attend osteopathic school. So we take 30 of those 54 students into the WWAMI program. There's 6 that are supported by WICHE scholarships. And so that means of that 54, 24 are going to be educated outside of the state. In terms of return, over the lifetime of the program, since our first class in '73, we're at 40% in terms of a return rate. When you add in graduates from the other 4 states, again, like I said, we have a lot of students coming to do rotations here. We capture some of those, we lose some of ours to the other WWAMI states, but our return rate overall is 56% for all WWAMI grads. And comparing it to the national norm, we actually do well. And again, you're going to see that we do it at a very value-driven proposition. So more data. This is the lifetime of the program. Again, the number of graduates that have matched into residency. So that's 731 graduates have matched into a residency. So we know basically what their specialty choice is going to be. And you can see that 51% have matched into family medicine, internal medicine, and pediatrics. Those are considered the primary care specialties. Again, realizing that in all those specialties, people go on to subspecialize. And, but this is the top 10, and that's one of the values, I think, of the WWAMI program. Our students really have, while we are very workforce focused, we're very primary care focused, our graduates have that capability and that ability to go into really any specialty. And many of those specialists return to our state to practice as well. So cost. The state spends just over $35,000 a year to educate the WWAMI, WICHE, and WICHE osteopathic students each year. The state appropriation is $4 million for WWAMI specifically in FY16. And then 60% of the state appropriations are actually spent back in the state of Montana. So while some of it goes off to Washington for administration of our program and oversight, much of it is spent back in Montana. And then again, there was a study done, actually commissioned at MSU back in 2010, that showed that for every dollar spent, Montana gets back just over $5 in terms of economic return for WWAMI. So looking at, you know, how do we do in terms of educating medical students compared to states that have bricks and mortar medical schools. So Wyoming and Idaho are part of the WWAMI program. They also have data much like ours. But North Dakota and South Dakota have standalone bricks and mortar medical schools. Now, one thing to note is in the past 3 to 4 years, they've increased class sizes significantly. South Dakota went from 42, and they're headed, I think, to 72, and North Dakota is going from 54 to 82 students a year. So they've really ramped up in the last few years. But you can see that those states support significantly more medical students per capita than Montana does between WWAMI and WICHE. Cost, this is really a telling figure. If you look at the cost per capita in Montana, and again, the Commissioner's Office helped prepare these slides, just under $5 per capita in Montana, and again, for states that have bricks and mortar medical schools, the cost is significantly higher. And then the last little slide comparing ourselves to North and South Dakota is the cost per student. You know, we really think that WWAMI and WICHE are really value-driven programs, and the cost is actually shows that, you know, we have great access to a top 10 medical school and for great value. So just one slide on our curriculum, because this is important. We just went through a large curriculum renewal. It's the largest since the school started in the late 40s at the University of Washington. And we no longer have years 1, 2, 3, and 4. We have these 3 phases, as you can see. And the big thing to note is that scientific foundations phase. For the first 40 plus years of the program, our students spent the first year at MSU, and then the second year, everybody moved to Seattle and spent a year in Seattle, and then dispersed back to the region or stayed in Seattle for clinical clerkships. Starting this last fall at MSU, our students will spend 18 months at MSU doing all of that scientific foundations phase. They will not go to Seattle for any of that basic science training. And then during the patient care phase, like I said, we're going to have 25 of our 30 students back in Montana. The other 5 will do a variety of rotations, some in Seattle, some back here, some around the region. And then the last phase, which used to be the 4th phase, is this career exploration phase. But it's really been, I would say, a significant change for our program to have our students now spending, and this is happening throughout the 5 WWAMI states, that students no longer go to Seattle for their second year. So we're really excited about that. We also have a new facility coming on board in partnership between MSU and Bozeman Deaconess Hospital. The WWAMI program will move over there this summer. So briefly on GME, and then we'll have some time for questions and discussion, hopefully. But this is another way to look at it. So I've just covered the whole part on medical school, but residency is the next step. And in our state, in order to gain a license now, you have to be residency trained and board eligible. And a residency is at least a minimum of 3 years, and for some specialties as long as 7 years or more. And that's really the end of the training pipeline, which then leads to us having practicing physicians in our state. And again, the retention is much higher where you do your residency. So briefly, our GME history, before '95, we had no residencies. And then in Billings, with the help of both St. Vincent's and Billings Clinic, they started the family medicine residency, and they currently have 8 residents per class. Then in Western Montana, we're really proud of the effort that was put in by the teaching hospitals in Western Montana, both hospitals in Missoula as well as KRMC up in Kalispell. And they started with 10 residents per class. Now, 3 of those residents in the 2nd and 3rd year go off to Kalispell and spend their time in Kalispell. And so that was, as you can see, prior to that, having 8 per year, and then we more than doubled it with that next residency. And then the Billings Clinic had a big effort in 2014 to start an internal medicine residency. And you can see they started with 6 residents a class, and now they just got a grant, and they're going to be expanding to 8 this year. So in the last 5 years, we've made really great strides in terms of the number of GME positions in Montana, and we currently have 26 first-year positions for residents and in our GME program. And you're going to see why that's important here in a second. But why don't we have more? And you know, why can't you just sort of turn on the button and have a residency? And I think, you know, if Dr. Vasquez was here, or Larry White, who helped start the program in Missoula, was here, you'd hear about what it takes to put together a residency. I would say one of the things, we'll never be at the top tier of states that have residencies. We just don't have a large metropolitan area. To have specific specialties, you need a large concentration of physicians that are willing to teach and practice. But we do have lots of other hospitals that are willing to sponsor GME, but there's a cost to it. The Billings Clinic estimates that probably in their first 5 years of operation of their internal medicine, it's going to be in the millions, 5s of millions of dollars to start their program, and that's a cost that they had to absorb. So it's really important to have that hospital support. You have to have teaching physicians, so you have to have leadership in the community to make it happen. And I think if you look at both the Billings Clinic and in Western Montana, both in Missoula and Kalispell, that physician leadership was really key to them starting residencies. And then you have to have physicians in the community that are willing to teach these residents. And so it's really important as hospitals are hiring new physicians that they're hiring physicians that want to be faculty and want to teach. And then accreditation is extremely complex, and I know Larry, who had been the hospital administrator at St. Pat's for years, he said this was the most complex and the most difficult thing he'd ever done, was to put together the residency in Missoula. So those are all part of the reasons why it's difficult, and it takes a lot of groundwork and a lot of effort. Now, 5 years ago, we were 50th. We've now we've inched our way up. But as you can see, I don't think, you know, I'm a person that is a positive thinker and glass is half full. I don't know that we'll ever be to the mean or median, but I do think that we can reach where North Dakota and South Dakota is and move above those states. And so we're working at that in terms of GME. Again, why is this important? And this is the big reason is that if you do your residency, it's at the end of your training experience, and you're likely to maybe have set up roots in your residency community. Maybe you met somebody, you've met new partners, and you stay in that area. And so now, currently, we have to send our students off to do residencies all over the United States. And so having more GME and having more residencies allows us to keep people in the state. Again, the residencies, like WWAMI, have a big effort to keeping people in the rural and underserved parts of Montana in the maldistribution aspect. And this is what it takes in order to have people, physicians end up in rural communities. And it's easy to practice in Kalispell. It's harder to practice in Cut Bank. And it takes specific effort in the training in terms of having residents spend time, having students spend time in those communities and developing attachments and understanding of what it takes in terms of being a physician. So numbers, I've always sort of said it's like trickle down. You could throw numbers at it, but maybe a few will trickle out at the end, but you have to be really intentional, and that's what the residencies are doing, and that's what WWAMI is doing. How is GME funded? Because it is expensive. And the big funder is the federal government. It's over $10 billion a year that through Medicare and Medicaid that they fund to hospitals to support GME. There's some funding you'll see that the state supports. And then in the end, these teaching hospitals have to subsidize the cost overruns. And we looked at sort of the lifetime of the programs in Montana, and there are some years where it's more and less, but it looks like it ends up being about $250,000 a year that these hospitals end up covering out of their bottom lines to cover their individual programs. So kudos to those teaching hospitals for stepping up and doing this. So this is where our state funding comes from. It actually exists within your budget. And 2 sessions ago, we had an increase to the $519,000. And at that same time, we were able to leverage it with a Medicaid match. Prior to that, we'd never really done this Medicaid match. So when the funding came in through the university system, that was it. But there's a mechanism federally, which most states take advantage of. We hadn't up to that point, that allows you to leverage that funding. And so now we actually have $1.5 million that we distribute between the 3 programs. This is what the economic impact of one family physician in a community is. It's almost $2 million, and Regent Nystuen, as a banker, could probably understand that multiplier effect of what happens when a physician lands in a community and they admit patients to the hospital and they employ people. And so it's a big multiplier. And if you look at just the 70 graduates from Billings that have stayed in the state and the number of years they've been in practice, we calculated $1 billion of economic impact just from those 70 graduates. So it's a big driver of these local economies. So I've got 2 slides left. One is just some questions. Do we have the appropriate physician workforce data? We've actually tried before the legislature to have with the licensing to get actual real-time data on what physicians are doing and where they're doing it and how much they're doing it. And we weren't able to get that through, but we have a group of us that are working to try to get this sort of uniform data set, because the data I showed you is nationally available data that's through the AMA, and it's always old and it may not be accurate, but it's the best that we have. What are our goals then based upon that workforce data, and then how do we meet those goals? I want to highlight the STEM thing, because that 54 number of terms of Montana residents that attend medical school, that's an important number, because that's an average over a long period of time. If you take it back 10 or 20 years, it's right around 55. That seems to be pretty steady. Why can't we take it to 65 or 70 or 80? And that's really that pipeline of K through 12 and then ending up in your higher education institutions to get prepared to be able to apply. And with that, some increase in medical students as well as residency. I'll get to that in the next slide. And then how do you keep people in these communities? How do you recruit them? How do you keep people there? We do have the Montana Rural Physician Incentive Program, so all of our students pay $5,000 a year in addition to their tuition into this fund. And then that goes back along with some state funding to give a loan repayment up to $100,000 for physicians to practice in rural communities. But we can do more. And then lastly, this is really a piece that I think we need to think about and focus on is, you know, we have a diverse population in our state. And there's a variety of ways you can define that, but certainly our Native American population is an important population that we need to serve, and we see very few applicants from that population. And so how can we improve that diversity? And then lastly, if you were going to ask me my future directions, I think we're going to be coming to you to ask for additional state funding for GME. The federal government changed the way that they distribute funds, especially for rural rotations. So when the residencies send their residents out to spend time in a small community, they no longer have any funding mechanisms. So they have to depend upon those critical access hospitals to fund the resident and their salaries. And so we're wanting to increase the amount of state funding so that can be leveraged to the Medicaid match and allow for, again, all three of our residencies are really focused on workforce and especially rural workforce. And then I think if we're going to really be sort of thinking about innovation and new ways to educate residents in the state, we need to look at some specific specialties that are harder to make it happen. It's going to take some innovative pilots, and I think those are a few of the specialties I've listed there. And you know, when a hospital starts to look at GME, there's just significant costs associated with that. And if anybody knows where hospital economics are going, their belts are getting very tight, and they don't have money to spend on pilots like this. So I think for us to think out of the box, because again, you know, like I said, we're at 26 PGY1 slots. You know, I'd like to take us on up the scale there, but it's going to take some significant effort, and I don't think that you're going to find that hospitals are going to be willing to spend lots of money to explore these options. So I'd like to think about some sort of innovation fund to be able to get more GME. And then this whole idea of diversity within WWAMI, I think I've had discussions with some folks around the state that are involved with this, as well as at last spring at MSU, and I think we just, you know, it needs to be more effort and less talk, and I think that requires a specific position. And then lastly, I think the last 6 months, the discussion of new medical education in Montana has again opened our eyes that, you know, we do send a lot of students out of state for education. Can we educate more of those students within the WWAMI program, and what would that look like? So that's my little education piece, and I'm happy to answer some questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Erickson, for what I consider to be a very comprehensive presentation and also a very timely presentation. At this point, I would open it up, the floor, to any questions that the board may have. Are there any questions that the board has? Regent Albrecht.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Erickson, and I think this is obviously very timely, and it's been elevated, obviously, in the last year, and I'm grateful for that, because I think it really is an opportunity for us to look at what the needs of Montana are. And so I'd like to hear from you what you see as an opportunity to really, when you talk about a scalable increase to the WWAMI slots, what needs to happen so that we're not just talking about it, we're actually making a plan to make that work? And do you have sort of a vision of what that might look like?
Thank you, Regent Albrecht. So you know, again, I think when you look at that 54 number, I always look at that because that is sort of the number of Montana residents that attend an MD allopathic medical someplace in the U.S. We take 30 of those. So what is a scalable increase? And I also am heavily involved with our admissions process. I think, you know, we have standards that we set that of the students that we're going to admit. You know, certainly we could admit another 10 or 15 students, I think, into our program and educate them through WWAMI. And I think that the new model of with our curriculum renewal and our new model of education, where we have this foundations phase, has really opened up some opportunities. And I think that the opportunity it's opened up is that, 40-plus years ago, when WWAMI planted itself in Montana, it planted itself, around a research institution. The new model, with 18 months doing foundations phase and doing it in a collaborative fashion among the 5 states, it really allows, there's less, I would say, intensity around the research component and more intensity around the education, and especially around clinical education. So we've moved a lot more clinical education into that first 18 months. And I would see, the opportunity that WWAMI, if it expanded, it could expand beyond Bozeman and MSU, and it could expand to other communities in the state. And I think there's models around the country where more and more there's regional campuses that are occurring. And I think large academic institutions are realizing that, having all their students educated in one community is not necessarily best for the workforce. And certainly if you look at Montana, we have distinct geographies and distinct political needs. And I think you heard that loud and clear. I've been around the state a lot the last few months, and I've heard a lot in the communities I've been that, while they value WWAMI, they want to have more of a hand and more of a partnership in WWAMI. So I think certainly WWAMI, if it expanded, it's most cost-effective for us to expand at MSU. But there is models out there now where I think WWAMI could expand. It could expand to other communities. And one of the things we see, we actually have a number of students that turn us down every year because they want to be someplace for 4 years. We don't offer that in WWAMI. We make people move a lot. And if you have families and kids and spouses with jobs, they want, a place where they can set roots for 4 years and do their education. And if you saw that slide that had the 3 tracks, we have a lot of clinical education going on in those 3 communities. And I think the idea of a 4-year regional campus in those communities is certainly a model that we could look at.
Additional questions? Regent Sheehy.
I have a couple of questions. The first one is, the $34,000 that is allocated per student, is that money that the state pays per student?
Yes, it is.
Or is that tuition dollars?
No, that's the money the state pays, and then there's tuition on top of that.
And then the student pays what?
Well, it's the first year they pay, it's right around $8,000 or $9,000 because they're paying MSU graduate tuition. So it's probably the best deal in the U.S. in terms of medical education. Years 2, 3, and 4, they pay UW in-state tuition, and I think this current year it's around $32,000 or $33,000 a year.
Would it be possible to create a 2-tiered approach to admission? The slots that we have allocated by the legislature, or however that occurs, I'm assuming those are legislative slots, that the legislature grants us those 30. Is that right?
Yeah, we went to the legislature for the funding 2 sessions ago, and because there is, once you start a student into this process, there's a 4-year commitment to their funding, and so we receive funding for 30 students.
Would there be a way to admit more students but have them pay the whole freight? Say, for example, 30 paid the $8,000 or $9,000 in-state tuition, and then the next 10 paid 45 or 50. I know that several of my parents' kids or my friends' kids are going to medical school out of state, and they're paying way over $50,000 a year. Is there a way to fund those students the way they would have to if they didn't get accepted to WWAMI and still admit them to our program?
Well, I think anything's possible. I just would sort of think, I think a little bit about that proposal. One is, if you look at, the state putting forward to fund for medical education, we don't spend a lot right now. So, we could increase funding to even get a fraction of our peer states and still have really innovative programs. Could you put that on the back of students? You could. Our debt load is already high. The student debt load is, just shy of $200,000 for even our program. If you make it a very expensive debt load, number one is very unlikely they would go into primary care. We've seen that. Right. There's data out there. And then number 2 is, they need to pay off that debt, so they're going to go someplace where they can pay off the debt. And so I think the downstream unintended consequences of that, I'm not sure that it's going to meet a workforce need. Now, could it educate students? Yeah. But I worry the costs that you're putting on the backs of the students wouldn't really get to where we want to be.
And probably wouldn't increase the number of physicians in Montana.
I would say that certainly not meet that number 5, the maldistribution of physicians. I think that would be not met by increasing the number of students and making them pay the full rate.
So what is the pressure that keeps the number at 30?
I think, again, like I said, I've been in this position 11 years. Every year we were looking at increasing, and I took the foresight of Governor Bullock and Commissioner Christian and the Regents and the legislature to sort of say, yeah, now is the time, and that was 2 sessions ago. And it's a cost. I mean, I think it's just, there's a cost to it. And, maybe we've shot ourselves in the foot a little bit for WWAMI because we are cost effective, and we've sort of pushed that cost effectiveness, but we also, we don't spend a lot on medical education. I think we get a lot in return. We don't spend a lot, and so I think, and we also probably haven't done a great job in communicating that, and so I'm glad I'm here. But I think it's education. That's educating you, and then educating our legislature, and our populace. And
Commissioner? I'm sorry.
I'm just wondering if there's some sort of way that when we're dealing with the legislature, rather than going in once a year, having some other formula, whether it's we always get 2 additional slots per year unless you say no, or just some other way of doing this with our legislative approach, whether it's graded funding, I don't know. I'm just trying to figure out how much is available, but it sounds like it's not. There are spots available at WWAMI. You could expand.
Yeah, we've talked with the University of Washington, and we can expand, and but it's the cost involved in terms of the cost per student. So.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner, I know that you've been involved in these conversations with the legislature and the administration.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Regent Sheehy, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of it does boil down to funding available. I think people realize it, but it's also a fairly significant investment per student in some of those conversations. I think there's more that we can do there, though. I honestly do. It's always a bit of a timing piece. We made a lot of headway with increasing the slots and in some GME funding, but I don't think that's the end of the rope. There's some complicating conversations around that, including, how much funding are they willing to put forward, with or without like clawback provisions and some of those other conversations, which I think detract some from our applicant pool and other reasons that we've sort of tried to avoid that, and so expand as much as we can under the current terms and conditions. And so I think that's important that we sort of factor that in both with the governor's office, legislative representatives on how we can continue to move it forward. I by no means think this is where our efforts should end on this. And as I mentioned, I think WWAMI is our medical school, and we continue to push forward where we can. I think the other comment I would add is WICHE operates a bit more like what you were suggesting in your first question, where we pay as a state a subsidy to allow students to attend a broader selection of schools, and basically what we do is sort of pay those down to a resident rate for them. So they do pay more at the WICHE schools. They are carrying more of that on the backs of students. We're sort of subsidizing between what would be non-resident and resident rates, which is a significant investment for the state. But I think, is there 6 of those, Jay? Or
yeah,
8?
6 MD slots and
2 osteopathic.
And 2 osteopathic.
Yeah, so 8 total. And then, there's some others within WICHE for, I think, physical therapy,
optometry.
Yep. Dental. So we have others that are more similar to where the students pay a higher percentage of those. And there's some opportunities probably to expand that area as well, although I think the best bang for our buck by far has been WWAMI. So, continues to be on our plate. I think continues to be conversations that we need to have as a board on where we set those priorities.
Go ahead, Regent Sheehy.
My last question is, from your viewpoint with WWAMI, is there anything else as a system that we can do towards medical education generally? Anything we can provide better with nursing or any of the other healthcare fields while we're having this discussion? We have a lot of other programs that involve medical, and don't expect you necessarily to answer today, but I'd like to think that we're trying to coordinate those efforts while we talk about this from this level, and I am particularly interested in your view.
Well, and I think, it's a little bit, everybody always makes this analogy that, is the Wayne Gretzky analogy. He was so successful because he always skated to where the puck was going to be. And so where is healthcare going to be in 5 or 10 years? That's a very nebulous sort of subject. And we're sort of making projections based upon the way we care for patients and the way healthcare is financed. But, in 5 or 10 years, if indeed there are more accountable care organizations and physicians are not paid for doing things to people, but they're paid to keep them healthy, that could change the metric. And I think the other thing we're seeing is the team-based care. So I think you're discussing nursing and PA and medical assistants. I mean, in my office, it has changed dramatically in the last 2 or 3 years, the way we care for patients and team-based care and moving people to practice at the highest level of their training and their licensure. And so I think it is an important discussion of how that all fits together. And because, we sort of know what we know. We practice this way because this is this is what we've been dealt. But I think there's better models. And again, I think the team-based model and, again, allowing people to practice in a different fashion is we're going to do a better job of caring for the public and hopefully at a more cost-effective rate. We are getting, just interestingly, all the residencies together, WWAMI, the PA program at Rocky, the DNP program at MSU, and Pacific Northwest University all together in April to discuss clinical training, because this whole idea of clinical capacity came up this last fall, and all of us feel pretty stressed in terms of where we're at now. And so we're all one of the things we're gonna try and do is coordinate, what is the training that's going on within our state? How much more capacity is there? How do we develop new capacity? How do we support those that are teaching? And because I think there's a limited resource there. And as healthcare becomes more complicated and physicians have more pressures put on them to produce and, all these things, they don't want to teach. One of the first things to give up is teaching. And so, it's not getting easier to recruit physician faculty, it's getting harder. And so I think there's some good discussions there. I'm not sure if I answered your question or not, but.
Commissioner?
Oh,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, I would say it's a very good point, because we not only rely on the hospital community and physician community for WWAMI, but we certainly do for everything else that we do, nursing, rad tech, all sorts of demands that we place. And Dr. Erickson didn't elaborate too much, but this teaching load is basically done without cost to us as a state. The faculty, for the most part, dedicate a tremendous amount of time to this effort. And when I say faculty, it's physicians already working a full-time job, picking up teaching assignments. So it is an incredible burden that we place on the physicians, the nurses, the existing medical arena in Montana. And so we need to certainly weigh all of that as we move forward.
Regent Johnstone.
Thank you, Chair Tuss. A comment and a question, I guess. The comment would be, there's been a considerable conversation about this broad topic. We clearly, I think, have a role in it, and I would encourage both Dr. Erickson and his representatives and members of OCHI to work on developing a longer-term strategy to address it. That's what we should be doing here in terms of developing a strategy and then making out resource allocation questions and conceivably even potentially tuition resolution. So I would be very disappointed if we have this conversation and a year from now we have the same conversation without having done anything about it. So I would encourage us to develop a longer-term strategy. My other comment would be, in business, I've heard the Gretzky metaphor so many times. I've concluded that I'm much better off skating to where the puck was than where it. But my question is, there's been some recent public conversation, I think, about going to a 3-year undergraduate medical education. I've read a couple of articles. Are you familiar with that? And is that a credible issue or strategy or consideration?
Sure. Actually, I was just had a meeting last week, with some rural medical educators, and 2 of them are starting up programs in Wisconsin that are 3-year programs. And so the medical regulators require that you do 152 weeks of medical education over 4 years to be accredited. 130. Most schools do 152. 154, something like that. But the accreditors say you have to do 130. And so these new 3-year schools are doing 134 weeks of education in 3 years. Texas Tech has done this for a while. In Texas, it's a very specific program. Now, I think the thing, if you think about medical education, it's a lot of students feel like it's drinking out of a fire hose, especially in those first years in terms of the amount of information. So, you know, what they've done is sort of eliminated breaks, tightened up everything. You know, you're doing your required clerkships at the same time you're applying for residency. So you haven't completed half of your required clerkships and you're already applying for a residency. So when I talked to them in Wisconsin, they said, you know, we're really looking for a specific person that wants to be a family physician, an internist, a primary care person, and they know that going in, and we're going to keep them on that track. But if they deviate from that, the 3 years doesn't work. So it is a model. It saves a year of tuition, which is huge for these students. And again, for an older student, a student that really knows the pathway they want to take, it's a model. And you know, we've had some discussions at WAMI and UW about whether we could do a pilot like that. So I think it's a good thought. It's something certainly to consider, but I think, you know, just my own mind thinking about how students, you know, our students feel. We have about 30 to 40% of the total UW class that expands every year and adds a 5th year because they don't know what they want to do, even though they have 4 years to figure it out. So, you know, the 3-year thing, you really want to make sure you're getting the right students and moving along a pathway that'll work. So.
Commissioner, would there be a way to take Regent Johnstone's request or question and perhaps do a little bit of digging into perhaps what our further role in graduate medical education in Montana can be from a university perspective?
Mr. Chair, absolutely. I would tell you that we obviously need to elevate it to the Regents more frequently than we have, but there are some of those efforts that are ongoing all the time. We are part of a GME council that meets on a fairly regular basis. We're having conversations now about what the 2017 agenda may look like. Obviously, expanding GME is a great return on investment for the state. So those conversations are underway. We have OCHI staff that participates those. We have MSU staff that participates. Dr. Erickson's on there, Dr. Vasquez. So they're ongoing. We just need to make sure that we get Regental input into those conversations too. So we're all sort of working toward the same end goal and obviously how those impact our budgets and our legislative requests. But absolutely can. And I guess I would just add, Regent Sheehy's also asked various questions about nursing and some other areas of healthcare. The data is a bit more complex than I thought on that topic, and we're boiling that down, but I anticipate us probably in May continuing this conversation and expanding to some of the other areas that we participate with in healthcare. So we'll get all of this on the agenda on a more frequent basis.
Thank you, Commissioner. Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Chair Tuss.
Sorry,
Dr. Erickson.
Before you begin, you got a follow-up?
I just wanted to follow up with you that, Commissioner, Bill is asking for the same thing that I'm asking, just in a lot better way. But I was looking for coordination of our plan, an overall strategy which would include all of the medical fields, not necessarily for change, but to have been considered in our overall strategy.
Regent Nystuen.
Thank you, Chair Tuss. Dr. Erickson, I enjoyed reading the 2015 state report for the WAMI program, so a lot of work went into that and so on. Maybe just a couple of quick questions. I noticed on page 19, the 30 is, I'd call Montana's best and brightest students entering into the WWAMI program. Can you give us some ideas to, of the 30, look ahead into your crystal ball, how many will get across the finish line? And those that don't, what might be those barriers? Is it a financial barrier that we should be considering, or resources, or what might be a reason that some, I'm assuming there will be a few that won't finish the program, but your thoughts?
Sure, thanks for the question, Regent Nystuen. So, and this is not hard data, but it's my recollection over the last 11 years. I would say we have about one student every 4 years that doesn't finish, so our completion rate is really high. And in every one of those cases, it's been a social issue that has come about. It hasn't been an academic or an economic issue. And so, things happen and life happens, and so those students don't complete because of that. But so, the vast majority of our students go through either in 4 or 5 years.
President Engstrom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Erickson, thanks for the good presentation. Appreciate your being here. I have 2 areas that I want to probe a little bit with you. Graduate medical education first. So, as you know, the demand for the family medicine residency slots in the Western residency program out of Missoula-Kalispell is tremendous. I hear 800 applications for 10 slots and things like that, and so we've been able to attract 10 really good candidates every year. And I don't know what the situation is in the Billings programs, but it's probably very competitive as well. So my question is sort of given that demand and the capacity issues for teaching that you've talked about and some of the suggestions for the areas, I wonder if you have any thoughts on sort of the next step in GME development. Is it expanding the existing programs? Is it adding another one in the western part of the state, the eastern part of the state? What would be the next step from your point of view in the residency side?
Thank you, President Engstrom. The question of expansion of GME, I'll give you a couple of thoughts on that. One is, for example, in Missoula, the way the funding works is once you become a hospital that accepts Medicare funding, you become capped. And so Missoula is becoming capped at 10 residents for the first year and 7 for each of the next. So their cap is going to be somewhere around 24. And if you wanted to expand, let's say the residency wanted to add 2 slots to it, they wouldn't be federally financed because they've reached their cap, which makes it's an arcane system. It's very onerous to deal with, and it doesn't allow for states that have been 50th to move up, because once a community in their hospital sets their cap, Medicare will no longer add additional funding slots. Now, every once in a while, there's legislation that comes about, and that's what happened in Billings, because they were set, their cap was set, and so they had 6 slots in the family medicine residency. They went to 8. They were funded by one was funded by a teaching health center grant that almost didn't get funded, so it was only funded for 5 years, and the funding ran out, but they had the residents. So they've been able to increase based upon some sort of soft funding. The internal medicine residency started because there was legislation that redistributed some unused caps around the country. So that being said, there's a bit of a problem. Once you start your residency, you've set your cap. And for example, I'll give the example of Kalispell. I mean, they have the 6 residents now in the 3rd and 4th, or 2nd and 3rd years, and that's their cap. If they want to have more GME, they're not going to find any federal funding, and federal funding often funds 2/3 to 3/4 of what it costs to have a resident in your community. So that's an issue. But that being said, I think there's some expansion for primary care. Again, if you look at the communities around the state that probably have enough capacity to think about this, I think We've been in discussions for a lot of years with Great Falls. Actually, even like 11 years ago, they looked at GME, and they've looked at it off and on. So Great Falls is big enough. The question is there teaching capacity? Bozeman has talked about the possibility of a primary care residency. So I think there's some scaled expansion of some primary care, but we're not talking a lot of slots, you know. And then I think the other one is to think about some of these novel ones. For example, psychiatry. The Billings Clinic is already doing some significant work at looking to start a psychiatry residency in Billings. It'll be a partnership program with the University of Washington, and residents will spend the first 2 years in Seattle and the last 2 years in Billings. And this is a model that's happened in both Spokane and Boise and been quite successful. So I think there's partnership models because, again, since we don't have large academic centers and lots of teaching physicians, you can do these sort of partnership models. I'll give you the example of pediatrics. In Alaska, the state of Alaska and some hospitals partnered with the University of Washington Pediatric Department. And is it 3 residents a year? 4. So there's 4 residents a year that go into the Alaska track, and they spend 3 months a year throughout their 3 years in Alaska and the other 9 months back in Seattle. And they just graduated their first class, and I think 3 of the 4 are staying in Alaska. So, you know, again, it's a model where you have residents for part of the year, and then part of the year they're at the large children's center getting their training. And I think that's the way it's going to be with a lot of our models. Surgery, Kalispell is looking at having a surgery resident next year from Columbia in New York. And there's models of rural surgery training where residents come out and spend a year in a rural community. So I think there's models where these, you know, again, we probably don't have the capacity to do it all ourselves, but at least we can start some partnerships. But those are the things that require some funding and some effort, and but they can pay off great in terms of that return of physicians and then the economics that spin off from that. So.
Okay, thanks very much. And my second question, in the state of Washington, we've been hearing quite a bit about the competitive nature of medical education with UW now partnering with Gonzaga and WSU getting authorization for its own medical school. Does any of that affect us?
So the question about what's happening in Washington State, especially in Eastern Washington, I would say directly no, indirectly maybe, but it really, you know, some of our students do rotations over there. It may change where they do their rotations, but we don't do any of the foundations phase in Eastern Washington, so I don't think it's going to change a whole lot. But I'll give you an example. I mean, you know, I said we have 24 students a year that go out of state for MD allopathic education. They have 210 that go out of state every year from Washington State. So there's great capacity to have medical education, more medical education happening in Washington. And so I think expansion is appropriate over there, but I don't think it's going to really directly affect our students.
Thanks.
Wanting to be respectful of your need to catch a plane,
Yeah, I have.
as well as the long morning that we've had here. There are a couple of additional short questions that I think people have. President Cruzado.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank the Commissioner and the Regents for bringing to the fore this very, very important topic for all of us in Montana. I'm very happy that we're having this conversation, and thank you so much, Shay. You always do such a great job. Since memory is feeble, it's good for us to remember just 6 years ago we were having a very different conversation among the Board of Regents. At that time, because of state realities, we were even talking about a 5% across the board cut for everything in our budgets, including WAMI slots. And it was evident that this program is so important to Montana, and we received so many communications about how important it was for us to preserve those slots. I remember then, shortly after that, starting conversations with Jay, with Martin Tynesy in Montana State University, Tracy Alec, the commissioner, about, well, what about if rather than coming to the legislature every session and try to explain and justify the importance of WAMI, that we moved in a different direction, and it's so good that that resulted in additional 10 slots. I welcome those cohorts of students, and I can tell you, it's an incredible change when I used to welcome 20 students, and now when I go and welcome 30 students. It's a substantial improvement, and we have a lot to be proud of. As we consider these conversations, I also would like to say, because I would be remiss if I don't say this, Montana State University has been very, very proud of 45 years of hosting WAMI. And quite honestly, I can tell you, we have done our very best trying to be the best possible host. Part of the winning strategy has been to have one location and then these residencies around the state, because then it balances the opportunities for medical education around the state. Because of the growth from 20 to 30, actually, we have entered into new opportunities. And thinking about the future for WAMI, as you know very well, this board approved a long-term lease with Bozeman Deaconess Hospital. So as we think about other opportunities in the future, I'm going to be kindly asking for you to consider the amazing institutional investments that we have made already in WAMI. I have seen some numbers, and if Bozeman at this moment educates those students at half the cost of what would it be if we were to start another site, I think that there's a way in which we can collaborate among the campuses and at the same time make sure that we preserve the hard-earned investments that we have already made there. I have a question for Jay. Jay, you mentioned about back in the day the importance of hosting this in a research institution. I have heard from many of our faculty members and saying, can we use WAMI? And I'm sure that President Engstrom will have the same interest. Can we also use WAMI as a launching pad and as a true Way Street collaboration with UW so that faculty at Montana State University, and I'm sure that UM, can also enter into more research opportunities with UW faculty?
Thank you, President Cruzado. And again, I would echo President Cruzado's comments in regards to the support that MSU has offered WAMI over the years. It's been amazing. I think the research, there are research collaborations. There's a large ITHS grant that has involved faculty from both U of M and MSU. And I think it's certainly an area where we would like to explore more collaboration. And I think that to build upon that partnership and certainly within the research arena is an area that I think could certainly see more growth. And I would be happy to be alongside you in moving that initiative forward, because certainly research dollars are declining, and I think the more that we can leverage partnerships, the better off we can be to sort of sustain that funding. So I am totally in agreement with you. So.
Seeing no further questions, Dr. Erickson, thank you. Thank you for your time today. This has been very helpful, I think, for everybody in the room. This is an important topic, and we really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
We're now going to take a well-needed 15-minute break. I will call the meeting back to order, and thank you for indulging us for a slightly longer than normal break. And at this point, I will turn the microphone and the floor over to a report from the governor's office. And we have Governor Bullock's Chief Education Policy Advisor, Suri Smiley, with us. Thank you for being here.
Great. Well, thank you for having me, and Chair Tuss, and apologies that Governor Bullock couldn't be here today, but I think he is actually going to be spending time with the Montana University system. He's on campus at MSU Bozeman talking to a group of students later this afternoon. So first I want to welcome and thank Regent Lozar for agreeing to serve in this capacity on the board. I know the governor is excited to have your participation and leadership as a new regent, so welcome and thank you. And also thanks to Chancellor Weatherby for hosting us this week. It's great to be here. I had the pleasure of being here about a month ago and really digging in a little bit more to the work in the School of Education and specifically the Early Childhood Education Program. And so appreciate both that visit and your hosting of this meeting. And thanks for the new mug. I've been drinking out of my Bobcats mug for the last few months, and it's been very hard, so now I have a new one. So thank you for that. Just a few updates I want to share, and I'm going to hand out a little handout from the Main Street Montana project. So as you'll recall, one of the pieces of Main Street Montana has been the key industry networks. So these are in 13 key sectors across the state, comprised of the leading business people within those sectors. And they've been organized around the 5 pillars of Main Street Montana. Of course, the first pillar is train and educate tomorrow's workforce today. And so they've been having discussions around those 5 pillars, pulling together kind of all their insight to put together recommendations for the governor and for the state in terms of moving forward in all of those pieces. And so what I've just passed around is a summary of the recommendations on the workforce component. There, you'll notice that the university system and post-secondary is mentioned a number of times, so wanted to raise these recommendations and just know that hopefully we will be working towards meeting some of these recommendations over the next weeks, months, years. Some of the themes I think that you'll see throughout all of the KINs in these workforce themes are really strengthening the links between the Montana University System, Montana Department of Labor, and our workforce system. So that's both at a systems level and in communities at the unit level as well. Increasing employer engagement in program design, curriculum design, and recruitment efforts for MUS. Another theme throughout the recommendations is expanding work-based learning opportunities, such as apprenticeships. We're talking about graduate medical education and the residency component, but there are lots of other models for on-the-job training. And so that's something that we have taken to heart and actually applied to be part of a work-based learning policy academy with the National Governors Association. So NGA, National Governors Association, provides technical assistance to governors' offices and really executive agencies around the country and provided this opportunity. So we're one of only 6 states that's going to be participating in this work to really scale work-based learning opportunities to connect youth and young adults ages 16 to 29 with STEM middle skills careers. So that's kind of the narrow focus of this work that we will be engaging in. We know work-based learning in all of its forms really is an effective strategy for strengthening our talent pipeline and benefits both the student learner to have some of that on-the-job experience while they're learning the theory and practice of it. It benefits employers in terms of increased retention and lower training costs. And so trying to figure out how we can grow that strategy both into new fields, potentially new career paths, and also just in terms of the number of opportunities that are available across the state. So we will be developing a statewide strategic plan, number of agencies involved to increase those work-based learning opportunities, working on a clearinghouse of resources for employers who are wanting to either start or grow those opportunities. And then also as part of it, we'll have a summit in the fall, so we'll make sure that all of the regions are invited to that. Obviously, the Montana University System is a critical partner in work-based learning as a provider of a lot of the learning portion of it. And so we have great representation on our sort of stakeholder group from MUS, including Deputy Commissioner Seck, Dr. Wolf, Dr. Kirk Lacey, both Healthcare Montana and RevUp are part of it, AHEX as well. So really looking forward to what comes out of that group and in terms of the learning. So that'll be over the next year and a half. You can expect to see more on that initiative. And just sort of along the lines of our conversation earlier, I think healthcare, this discussion about healthcare in particular is really important one to have in a number of different areas, but it's Montana's largest employing industry. So I think it's about 64,000 jobs currently in the state, and we'll be adding 1,300 jobs a year through 2024, and that's due to our aging population, due to things like Medicaid expansion that are increasing access to healthcare. And so I think having those strategic conversations and elevating those strategic conversations is really important. So thanks for raising that earlier. The last thing that I wanted to mention, and I know we have a presentation on it later, so I won't go too much into it, but on dual enrollment, excited to preview that Commissioner Christian and Governor Bullock and Superintendent Juneau have kind of united behind a goal of increasing the number of dual enrollment students by 1,000 every year for the next 3 years. So would be significant growth, but I think as we talked about as, again, one of the strategies for really both engaging our students in post-secondary opportunities, including those who may not otherwise be on that path, shortening time to degree, et cetera. All the evidence both in the state and the country shows that that's a good way to do it. And so it's an ambitious goal. It's going to take a lot of effort on behalf of all of us to get there, but the governor's committed to it. I know the commissioner and Superintendent Juneau are as well, and so we're excited about that. So I think with that, that's all I really have, and we'll turn it back over to you unless there are questions.
Any questions? Seeing none, thank you very much. Please give the governor our very best. We're very pleased that he is spending his day at a unit of the Montana University system, although not here with us, and we look forward to seeing him in Havre in May. Thank you very much. We'll turn the mic over to the Office of Public Instruction. Mr. York, thank you for being here in Superintendent Juneau's stead.
Yes. And
the floor is yours.
Superintendent Juneau sends her regards, and we too would like to thank Montana Western for this is a great location, great spot, and there's just so many good things going on here. So we've worked well with Beth and Montana Western from the Office of Public Instruction. I would like to back up a little bit and bring up a little conversation we had earlier around free and reduced lunch, because there's a very important point in this. The actual number, when you're comparing to the student enrollment as a whole, is about 45%. If you look at the number of students that are accessing school meals, that jumps to about 60% of the kids that access meals at school do qualify for free and reduced. Now, why this is important is the number that Zach was bringing up was 65%. And actually, if you look at the 45%, it's probably higher in the elementary. In fact, it is, and much lower in the high school, because high school kids tend to have open campus and don't often access the meals, so we don't get that count. So that makes that number even more amazing. And what that number says is the kids that we're reaching in that college application week, most of them, 2/3 of them, are coming from homes that would qualify for free and reduced lunch. So where we have about a 30% rate of high school students that are free and reduced, we have 65% of those that are reaching at college application week that are free and reduced. So we're hitting a really, really important segment of the population. So I just wanted to clear that up. This is Superintendent Juneau's end of her term. She's done some absolutely amazing work in the state of Montana. Our graduation rates last year in the state were the highest they've ever been, highest since the year 2000 when we started keeping the records. In 2009, it was about 80%, 80.7, and last year was 86. So those those numbers are very pleasing. We now have graduation matters in 53 communities, and we have been supported by $1.3 million from private business and foundations to carry that program forward. So as she leaves office, I hope that this will be an ongoing legacy for the work that she's done. And I remind you that it's not just graduation, it's graduating with career or college ready. And that's an important thing. You don't want to give up the quality to get the number higher. That's very, very important. We're working hard on the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was finally passed 8 years after it was supposed to be renewed. We're excited about the opportunities. It changes the field a lot, and of course this is tied to federal money. It was the old No Child Left Behind. We're excited about the opportunities. There's lots of connection to post-secondary in the law. So I'm sure we'll be involved with you in many, many ways as we roll this out. The one thing about the law that's different is it is from the ground up. It requires a tremendous amount of input from the local level up to the state. And it backs the federal government out of some of the work that the states are doing. They don't quite have the hammer that they had in the past. So we're excited about that. Testing-wise, it still requires testing. We have to have a test every year in grades 3 through 8, and one grade in high school, which is grade 11. Superintendent Juneau has decided that we test enough at grade 11, so you'll need to know that the ACT is the test that we'll be using to test all 11th graders this year. SBAC, the Smarter Balance testing, will occur still in grades 3 through 8. I wanted to call out Ron Muffick and Ms. Sims from Helena College and others who worked on the suicide summit that was held out at MSU. I didn't make it myself for reasons I can tell you about later. But we had 4 or 5 people from the office that did go, said it was a fantastic experience. In fact, one of our talented young OPI professionals actually presented a breakout session at the conference, and it's a good start. It's a good start. Hope we can keep our collaboration moving in a forward direction because it's an important issue in our state. So that's everything I have.
Thank you, Steve, for being with us for that report and obviously for representing the superintendent at these meetings. We've had a wonderful relationship with OPI during her tenure in that particular office, and so please extend to us our regards. Thank you. Are we ready for another break?
Ready for lunch.
It's a long break. We're having lunch. Chancellor, it's my understanding that the Regents will be having lunch with the students in the library. Do you want to give us instructions?
Again, Regents and the chancellors will be having lunch in the second floor of the library, which is just out this door across the way. And for everyone else, we have a student experience for you. You're going to be eating in our dining hall, and that is in the lower level of Matthews Hall. Just follow the crowd. It is, maybe a couple of blocks that way, if you look at it that way. It's, and don't be alarmed by the line. I eat there frequently, so I know. You just, if you don't want a hot meal, bypass that first part of the line and go to the salad bar. Soup, burger bar. It's great homemade food, so enjoy. I think that's about it.
Thank you, Chancellor. We will stand in recess until approximately 1:20.